Chapter 0. I never intended it, but I enlisted in the military at a young age. After awakening memories of my past life, I realized this world was inside a game. From that moment, I struggled desperately to survive. Demon of the battlefield, of the magic bullet, the Emperor's mad dog. As a result, I earned these ominous titles attached to my name. I didn't seek out these titles, but I lived with them rather contentedly. What did it matter? The enemy feared me and my allies praised me. However, I couldn't keep acting as the Emperor's lapdog forever. The Empire will be defeated by the allied nations. The future, which could be summed up in a single line, was gradually becoming reality. Maybe that's why, in a way, I was glad when a battle defeat forced me to face the Emperor. If the Emperor reprimanded me, I could simply bow, apologize, and resign. After that, I'd change my identity and flee to some remote island. Problem solved. I've saved up quite a bit of money. Worst case, I could sell military secrets to the allied nations. No more hardships on the battlefield. From now on, I was set to enjoy a rosy life. The thought made me want to laugh, but standing before the Emperor, I had no choice but to put on a guilty expression. Raise your head, Daniel Steiner. At the Emperor's command, I looked up. Sylvia von Amberg. She was the Empress who wielded absolute power over the Empire, and a tyrant who regarded human lives as mere insects. Naturally, her personality was atrocious, leaving her only redeeming quality as her stunning appearance. Even now, I couldn't help but be drawn to her sapphire blue eyes that resembled lapis lazuli and her golden hair that shone like rays of spring sunlight. You returned to the capital after losing 3 divisions, including the Mage Corps, at the Battle of Skialan. This marks a massive loss for the Empire and a historical blunder. Good, all the Emperor had to do now was reprimand me. Once she criticized me, I'd use it as an excuse to leave the military and start my happy new life. However, considering the enemy's surprise attack, the confusion during the chain of command, and the fact that your efforts minimized the damage despite the retreat, your merits as a commander are recognized. Wait, what? Taking all factors into account, I shall award you the Empire's first-class military medal, the White Dragon Medal of Honor. For some reason, the Emperor didn't seem to have any intention of letting me go. Chapter 1. There's a game called Empire of Emperor. Literally translated, it means the Emperor's Empire, a fantasy war game set in a modern era. The main objective of the game is to stop the militaristic empire, which seeks to unify the world through its overwhelming national power. While it wasn't particularly popular, it was my favorite game because of its incredibly rich NPC interactions. For example, even peasants had different values depending on their region and country. Soldiers didn't just move mechanically. They harbored personal grievances, and if the command failed to address them, desertion and rebellion would occur. Additionally, NPCs who were once allies could become enemies depending on the player's actions, and vice versa. Truly, it was a masterpiece. Even a slight variation in gameplay could create entirely new storylines, making it the best game I had ever played. However, there was one flaw. No matter how you played, the Empire was destined to fall. After all, the player-controlled protagonist belonged to the allied nations, the Empire's enemy, so the outcome was inevitable. The problem was that this so-called inevitable outcome had somehow become my reality. As you all know, the allied nations have surrounded our infantry divisions at a distance of 3 kilometers from the first defensive line and 5 kilometers from the second. I trust no one here is unaware that breaking through this encirclement is the only way to turn the tide. I turned to look at the man speaking in a stern voice. A middle-aged man with a scarred face and sharp wrinkles, someone I knew all too well. Brigadier General Heinrich Schmidt, commander of the 1st Magic Mobile Corps Operations Headquarters. He was a named NPC you couldn't avoid encountering in the game. Which means it was undeniable that I had somehow ended up inside the game world. I wanted to deny it, but the tactical map spread out on the headquarters table, and the proud eagle-shaped emblem displayed behind Heinrich confirmed it repeatedly. And as far as I knew, there was only one place where that eagle emblem served as a military symbol: the Holy Bavarian Empire. That's right. I was at the heart of an empire fated to be destroyed by the game's ending. And what was I doing here in the middle of it? Digging through my memory, I recalled my title: Second Lieutenant Daniel Steiner, Assistant Operations Planner at the Imperial General Staff. What an ironic twist. I was an assistant planner at the Imperial Military Headquarters. If I hadn't known the Empire was doomed, I might have popped open champagne to celebrate my elite career path. But knowing its inevitable downfall made my title worth less than garbage. At the ending, the leaders of the Empire, branded as war criminals, couldn't escape execution. And as long as I was part of this structure, I was fated to share their fate. That couldn't happen. I hadn't survived this long just to die a meaningless death. I wanted to submit my resignation, but Imperial officers were bound by an 8-year mandatory service term. It wasn't a job I could just walk away from. So how could I escape this place? While wiping the cold sweat from my palms, I clenched my fist as a shallow realization struck me. Dishonorable discharging. If I was declared unfit by court-martial, I could be dishonorably discharged. That would free me from the military's control. I could leave the Empire as a free man. Lieutenant. I flinched as Heinrich called out to me. When I looked up, Heinrich and the senior officers were all staring at me. It seemed like you were deep in thought, looking over the map and pondering our situation. Did you come up with a plan? I did think of something. A plan to escape this damned empire. Feeling the weight of the officers' gazes, I cleared my throat and quickly calculated my next move. This might be my chance to get dishonorably discharged. Why did Heinrich ask for my opinion? As an assistant planner, they probably thought I picked up something useful while observing the senior staff. These rigid, old-fashioned officers wanted to hear a fresh perspective from a young officer brimming with enthusiasm. Heinrich, in particular, was the type who listened to opinions regardless of rank. But I had no intention of meeting his expectations. I had no desire to sink with this doomed ship. Commander, sir. So I decided to say something completely wrong to ensure my dishonorable discharge. With all due respect, may I ask how you plan to send reinforcements to rescue our troops trapped in enemy territory? According to the staff's recommendations, we'll advance through the ridges of the Tebeta Mountains. Intelligence reports suggest it's the least guarded area. The Tebeta Mountains. After pausing, I spoke. In that case, I must respectfully ask you to reconsider. The room fell silent. It was natural for them to be shocked, a low-ranking officer questioning the staff and intelligence reports. I felt the pressure of the officer's glares, but I feigned composure and continued. Commander, doesn't it strike you as odd? Why is the enemy's surveillance tight everywhere except for the Tebeta mountain ridges? You find it suspicious? Yes, it feels like the enemy is luring us in, as if they're encouraging us to advance through the Tebeta Mountains. It was complete nonsense. The Intelligence Bureau's reports were obviously more accurate than my baseless claim. But I pushed forward because my goal was dishonorable discharge. So I doubled down on my ridiculous argument. The enemy must have set traps around the Tebeta mountain ridges, waiting for us. Any evidence? My instincts tell me so. When I responded firmly, Heinrich's eyebrow twitched. After a brief laugh, Heinrich tapped the table. Name and rank. Second Lieutenant Daniel Steiner, Assistant Operations Planner. Very well, Daniel Steiner. You do realize you're directly opposing the staff's conclusions, don't you? Yes, sir. If we follow your suggestion, we'll need extensive reconnaissance, delaying our advance. Are you prepared to take responsibility for the consequences? Exactly what I wanted. If my prediction proves wrong, I will gladly resign and leave the military. The room erupted with murmurs and sighs. My superior officer scowled and tried to reprimand me. Lieutenant Steiner, how dare you speak out of turn? He fell silent when Heinrich raised his hand. Daniel Steiner, I'll give you a chance. Heinrich smiled, but his tone sharpened. But remember, words cannot be taken back. If your decision costs the Empire, I'll have no hesitation in calling for a court-martial. His piercing gaze sent chills down my spine. A true veteran who commanded authority with a single word. In another situation, I might have backed down. But not now. I held his gaze and smiled faintly. That's exactly what I want, Commander. The next morning. Imperial General Staff Officer Dormitory. Knock, knock. I slowly opened my eyes at the sound of knocking. Turning my head, I glanced at the alarm clock. It wasn't wake-up time yet. Who the hell is knocking this early? Still half asleep, I blinked in confusion as another knock echoed through the door. Second Lieutenant Daniel Steiner, the commander is summoning you. Wake up immediately. The mention of the commander snapped me wide awake. Ah, understood. I hurriedly answered, jumped out of bed, and quickly changed into my uniform before opening the door. Outside stood an officer, also dressed in the Imperial military uniform. Judging by the 3 diamonds on his shoulder epaulet, he was a captain, my superior. Are you Second Lieutenant Daniel Steiner? Yes, sir, but why is the commander summoning me? Though I asked, I already had a pretty good idea. After hearing my suggestion, the commander must have deployed a large reconnaissance unit to the ridges, only for them to come up empty-handed. Wasting manpower during wartime was practically a crime, so the commander had likely called me to reprimand my incompetence. Heinrich would label me as human garbage and immediately convene a court-martial. Once that happened, all I had to do was plead guilty, resign, and secure my dishonorable discharge, a free pass out of this mess. Depending on how things went, I might even end up serving a short prison sentence. But rotting in jail for a few years was infinitely better than getting executed as part of the leadership of a defeated war criminal nation. Thinking everything was going according to plan, I felt a wave of relief. Until I saw the captain's lips curl into a smile. Was he mocking me? No, wait, something felt off. You can be proud of yourself, Lieutenant. Thanks to your accurate instincts, our forces were able to prevent a disaster in advance. The commander has summoned you to discuss a reward for your contribution. What the hell? Chapter 2. Imperial General Staff Headquarters. Commander of the Magic Mobile Corps Office. Russell. Seated behind a luxurious mahogany desk, Heinrich flipped through the pages of a personnel file. The document detailed the personal information of none other than Daniel Steiner. Name: Daniel Steiner. Place of birth: Fiemery Village, Beta Gen Barony, Southern Empire. Special notes: confirmed to have been abandoned by parents and raised in an orphanage. Later recognized for magical talent by a conscription officer and enrolled in the Imperial Magic Academy, graduating at the top of his class. Heinrich clamped a pipe between his lips as he finished reading the notes. Graduated at the top of the Magic Academy, huh? It wasn't particularly surprising. After all, only those with exceptional talent could secure a position in the Imperial General Staff headquarters. However, the fact that he was an orphan stirred an unexpected sense of admiration within Heinrich. A man with no family backing dared to stake his reputation on pure instinct. It wasn't unheard of for enthusiastic young officers to pierce through the icy atmosphere of a military conference and voice their opinions. But in most cases, their courage was bolstered by the unspoken security of their family's name. No matter the consequences, they knew their families would protect them from complete ruin. And yet, Daniel Steiner, this newly commissioned officer with no family ties, had no such safety net. If his suggestion had led to failure, the repercussions wouldn't have ended with mere dismissal. Daniel must have known that. Even so, he had stood by his judgment. And in the end, his judgment had been proven sound. The reconnaissance operation revealed that enemy forces were indeed preparing an ambush near the ridges. Does he possess the eyes to see through the battlefield? Of course, it could have been a coincidence, nothing more than sheer luck. Still, there was no denying that Daniel's insight had prevented a disaster. In an era of fierce competition, where even the smallest shifts could alter the course of war, Daniel's sharp observation was like rain in a desert. From Heinrich's perspective, he was a talent too valuable to ignore. Knock, knock. A knock on the door interrupted Heinrich's thoughts. He closed the file and set it aside on the desk. "Commander, sir." Reporting with Second Lieutenant Daniel Steiner as ordered. Heinrich exhaled a plume of smoke and removed the pipe from his mouth. "Enter." The office door opened, and Captain Heinrich's aide entered with Daniel Steiner in tow. Tall, with black hair and dark eyes, Daniel's gaunt appearance didn't hide the determination in his expression. The two approached the center of the room and saluted in perfect unison. Heinrich returned a casual salute, prompting the captain to step aside. Daniel shifted into parade rest, awaiting Heinrich's address. His posture was impeccable, like a textbook model of a soldier. Not a single flaw could be found in his stance. Heinrich felt a hint of approval as he spoke. "Second Lieutenant Daniel Steiner, as you've likely heard from my aide, thanks to your keen instincts, we were able to avert disaster. That is an undeniable achievement." Daniel remained silent, maintaining proper decorum. Even after earning recognition, he didn't let his emotions get the better of him, a model soldier's restraint. At least that was what Heinrich thought. In reality, Daniel's mind was in chaos. My bullshit was actually right. How the hell did this happen? Grinding his teeth to suppress the panic, Daniel listened as Heinrich continued. "Achievements must be rewarded. I plan to nominate you for the next round of promotion evaluations. What do you think?" Daniel's shoulders flinched. To him, promotion meant moving closer to death. Taking a deep breath, he frantically searched for an excuse. "Commander, sir, I deeply appreciate your generous offer. However, I don't believe I deserve special treatment based on a single achievement." "Oh, a single achievement, you say?" "Yes, sir. As an officer of the Holy Bavarian Empire, I only did what was expected of me. I humbly request that you reconsider including my name in the promotion review." Heinrich blinked in surprise. He'd seen countless soldiers who would do anything to climb the ranks, but this was the first time someone had outright rejected a promotion. The captain standing beside him seemed equally stunned. What a strange man. Heinrich let out a chuckle and set his pipe aside. "Lieutenant, you seem mistaken. Your achievement is not just one accomplishment. You've saved hundreds of lives. I cannot ignore that." "Sir, I was merely—" "That's enough. Are you implying you don't know that fairness and discipline are the foundation of the Imperial Army? If you continue to refuse, I'll consider it a rejection of those values. In other words, Heinrich had made up his mind. The commander's words carried the weight of absolute authority. There was no room for argument. Faced with no other choice, Daniel reluctantly surrendered. "I will accept this honor, sir." Heinrich observed Daniel closely before nodding in satisfaction. "Good, consider it settled, you're dismissed." Daniel saluted sharply, and Heinrich returned it. As Daniel turned and left the office, his footsteps faded into the distance. Heinrich leaned back in his chair and smirked. "Quite the rare breed, wouldn't you agree, Captain?" The captain, still staring at the closed door, finally turned and replied, "Yes, sir. Most people would do anything to boost their records. I've never seen someone try so hard to downplay their own achievements. A real soldier, not just in title but in spirit. A man who truly seeks to protect the empire and crush the allied nations." It reminded Heinrich of his own younger days. Smiling contentedly, he added, "The military needs people like him, especially now, with the Allied forces growing stronger." Heinrich picked up his pipe and chuckled softly. "I'm curious to see just how far he can rise." Cut the crap, seriously. Back in my private dormitory, I shouted in frustration. And who could blame me? Things were spiraling completely out of control. Early promotion. This wasn't just about adding one more diamond to my rank insignia, upgrading me from second lieutenant to first lieutenant. An early promotion in the elite Imperial General Staff meant being acknowledged as an elite even among elites. Even if I were reassigned later, the label of early promoted elite from the General Staff would stick to me like a damn shadow. It was the highest honor and the most secure career path a junior officer could possibly obtain. In other words, I had just taken one more step toward becoming a key member of the Empire's leadership. And that also meant I had just drastically increased my chances of getting my head chopped off when the Empire inevitably lost the war. Sitting down on my bed, I ran a hand down my face before looking up. The full-length mirror reflected a man with faint dark circles under his eyes. I could vaguely remember shouting for joy when I first confirmed my initial assignment to the General Staff. But after awakening my past life memories, this place had turned into a living hell. I stared at my reflection for a while before sighing and pushing myself to my feet. I opened the window and looked outside. Senior officers were arriving one by one. Right, this place was practically littered with high-ranking officers, like pebbles on the roadside. It was the perfect environment for earning points to climb the ranks, or, conversely, the perfect environment for losing points just as quickly. Things may have taken a slight detour, but nothing's really changed. All I had to do was act so incompetent and disgraceful that it completely overshadowed my previous achievements. Loosening the suffocating tie of my uniform, I exhaled slowly. "Commander, I sincerely thank you for placing your trust in me, but I don't want an early promotion, especially not in this empire." To cancel my early promotion and speed up my dishonorable discharge, I needed to fully commit to becoming an irredeemable scoundrel. Fortunately, the General Staff had the perfect ingredient for that transformation. That ingredient was none other than my immediate superior, Major Karl Heinrich. A man who started his day by berating me and ended it by treating me like dirt. An absolute disaster of a human being. If I used my direct superior, Karl Heinrich, as leverage, there was still a chance to secure my dishonorable discharge. "Just wait and see, Commander. No matter what it takes, I'm getting out of this empire." Chapter 3. Dressed in my uniform and having finished breakfast at the officers' mess, I made my way to the operations staff's private office. It was supposed to be just another routine morning. The only difference was that several senior officers in the hallway had started recognizing me. So you're that famous lieutenant, the one who embarrassed the staff officers at the command post. Oh, don't get me wrong, it's a compliment. Lieutenant, I can tell you're confident in your abilities. But don't show off too much in front of your superiors, unless you plan on having a short military career. Trust me, that's advice from experience. Wow, I thought the general staff was full of rigid bureaucrats, but it turns out we've got someone like you. Keep it up. I'll be rooting for you. They stopped me every time I passed by to deliver long-winded speeches, leaving me dizzy by the time I escaped. Since ignoring them wasn't an option, I got through it by repeatedly using the magic trio of phrases. Understood? Is that so? And thank you. The real problem was that I wasted so much time talking to officers that I ended up late for work. The reporting time was 8:30 a.m. It was now 8:28 a.m. With the staff offices located on the 5th floor, even walking as fast as possible would take at least 4 minutes. And since Imperial officers were bound by that damn decorum rule, I couldn't even run unless I was in the field, so tardiness was guaranteed. Carl's going to throw a fit again. Once more, let me remind you, my direct superior, Major Karl Heinrich, was a neurotic bastard who overreacted to the smallest mistakes. If he were even remotely competent, I might have grudgingly respected him. But his entire record boiled down to trembling in the rear lines during a defensive battle against the Allied nations 7 years ago. How someone like that ended up in the supposedly meritocratic Imperial General Staff was beyond me. If you're wondering about his rank and title, look no further than his background. Karl Heinrich was from an aristocratic family, and his father was an ambassador. The empire might have preached meritocracy, but beneath the surface, nepotism and personal connections were tangled everywhere. And Karl Heinrich was a prime example of someone reaping all the benefits of that system. My personal evaluation: he was an incompetent, unstable excuse for a human being, living, breathing garbage. I had proof, too. If my dark circles had shareholders, Karl Heinrich would easily hold a majority stake. I was already bracing myself for whatever nonsense he'd throw at me today, but my heart remained calm. Once I resign, none of this will matter. Since my goal was a dishonorable discharge, I no longer had to tiptoe around Karl. Was this how a salaryman felt on their last day at work, resignation letter in hand? I even felt a faint smile tugging at my lips. With light steps, I made my way to the 5th floor office and knocked. Second Lieutenant Daniel Steiner, Assistant Operations Planner, reporting. Permission to enter. After stating my rank and name, I opened the door. The first thing I saw was Karl sitting at his desk, clutching his head like he'd made some catastrophic mistake. Sweat trickled down his face, and he looked genuinely distressed, an unusual sight. He didn't seem to notice me, so I stepped closer and spoke. Major Karl Heinrich, sir, you need to be ready for the operations staff meeting at 9 a.m. You should start preparing now. I trailed off. Karl lifted his head at the sound of my voice, and his eyes burned with rage. Was he seriously this mad over me being 2 minutes late? Before I could process it, Karl shot up from his chair. Do you have any idea what you've done? What the hell was he talking about, being 2 minutes late? I blinked in confusion as Karl stormed toward me. Who said you could speak to the commander? Who told a lowly orphan like you to stick your nose into a staff meeting? Grabbing me by the collar, Karl shoved me hard. I barely managed to keep my balance by stumbling backward. Because of you, my entire plan is ruined. Ruined. And it's not just ruined, I'm in danger now, you bastard. What was this lunatic even saying? Sure, he was always a jerk, but today. Thud. Before I could finish the thought, my head slammed into the wall. I let out a low groan. If I go down, I'm not going alone. I'll drag you down to hell with me, you hear me? He's lost it. Normally, I would have swallowed my anger and let it slide. But not today. You started this, Carl. What, did you just talk back to your superior? Smack. I slapped his hand away and punched him square in the face. Carl flinched and tried to turn his head, but it was too late. My fist crashed into his cheekbone. Arg! Carl staggered backward, clutching his face. I stepped forward, grabbed his collar and tripped him. Thud! He hit the floor with a pained grunt, spitting in rage. I climbed on top of him, drawing my fist back. Pausing for a moment, I watched Carl tremble before he spoke. This is assaulting a superior officer. You'll face a court-martial and your career will be over. You know that, right? Of course I knew. I shrugged. You don't need to worry. I'm doing this to end my career. What are you? Smack. Carl's words cut off as my punch knocked him out cold. I stood up, brushing the dust off my hands. Footsteps rushed toward the office. They must have heard Carl screaming. The door burst open, and 2 soldiers entered. What's going on here? They froze at the sight of Carl unconscious, on the floor and me standing over him. I decided to help them out. It's assault. I'm the culprit. Arrest me. Despite my explanation, they hesitated. I sighed. What's the holdup? Need to compare my fist to his bruises first. And no, sir. Finally snapping into action, the soldiers tied my wrists with rope. As I stood there expressionless, a wave of relief washed over me. It's just impulsive assault, so the punishment won't be severe. With my previous achievements, I'll probably just be discharged. It was practically a clean exit from the military. Suppressing the urge to cheer, I glanced out the window. The warm, vibrant colors of spring greeted me. It was the perfect season to leave the army. That evening, Major Karl Heinrich's residence. Search every corner. Yes, sir. At the order of Captain Philip Bender, aide to Brigadier General Heinrich Schmidt, the soldiers scattered throughout the house. Philip strolled leisurely through the living room, lost in thought. Today, Second Lieutenant Daniel assaulted his superior officer. When he first heard the news, he thought he'd misheard. How could someone who just earned commendations commit such an act? Especially someone like Daniel, who, in Philip's view, embodied the model soldier. There had to be a reason. Heinrich seemed to share Philip's thoughts and instructed the military police to conduct a thorough investigation after their delayed arrival. During questioning, Carl displayed signs of paranoia, spouting nonsense like, "The Allied nations might try to kill me." Sensing something off, Heinrich ordered Philip to search Carl's residence, which was why he and the soldiers had stormed the house. "Captain, over here, please." A soldier's voice snapped Philip out of his thoughts. "I'm coming." Walking over, Philip saw the soldier tapping lightly on the wooden floor. Thump, thump. The hollow sound was far too light for solid wood, as if it were empty inside. "This part sounds different." "An old trick, tear it up." "Yes, sir." Using a crowbar, the soldier pried open the floorboards, revealing a small box. Philip knelt, picked up the box and opened it. Inside were documents and several letters. This is. They were classified imperial military documents, information that couldn't be allowed to fall into enemy hands. The letters offered promises of large sums in exchange for selling information to the Allied nations. Even more damning was the most recent order to lure imperial reinforcements into advancing through the ridges. That bastard. Karl Heinrich was a traitor to his people. Blinded by greed, he had sold secrets and sabotaged operations, a slippery snake of a man. Which means Daniel's assault wasn't the act of a disgraceful officer. It must have been a reaction to the rage he felt toward this treasonous scum. Daniel Steiner wasn't a criminal. He was a hero who unmasked a traitor and protected the empire. We completely misunderstood him. Philip needed to return to headquarters immediately to clear Daniel's name. Having reached a decision, Philip closed the box and stood. "Soldier, I'll head back to headquarters. Report any additional findings to me." "Yes, sir. May I ask why you're leaving in such a hurry?" Philip smiled as he looked down at the soldier. "These documents prove that Second Lieutenant Daniel Steiner is innocent. We need to clear the name of the hero who dedicated himself to the Empire as soon as possible." The soldier froze for a moment. It was the first time he'd seen Captain Philip, often called a cold-blooded man, smile so brightly. Chapter 4. Sniff hic. The sound of quiet sobbing pulled me out of my sleep. Annoyed, I turned my head and saw a girl without any rank insignia on her uniform, a recruit. Her name was Freen, I think. I'd met her yesterday when I was thrown into the military police detention center. Judging by her light brown hair and dark eyes, she was probably from the southern provinces. Since we seemed to be from the same region, we'd exchanged a few words. But now, she was stuck to me like glue, making it exhausting just to sit next to her. I considered ignoring her, but I figured she'd just keep crying if I left her alone. So I decided to speak up. A soldier of the Empire shouldn't shed tears so carelessly. At the sound of my voice, Freen froze and quickly stifled her sniffles. "I'm sorry, I have no excuse. I just started thinking about my father back home." "Your father, is he ill?" "No, not at all. He was proud of me for enlisting in the Imperial Army, but here I am, stuck in detention before even completing my training. I feel so pathetic." "Did you just say 'sir' in your sentence?" When I pointed it out, Freen flinched. Sorry, sir, I'll correct myself." She was hopeless. I shot her a cold glance before turning away. "You said you were sent here because you refused to fire a gun due to religious beliefs, right?" "Yes, sir, I applied as a medic, so." "Even medics need to know how to shoot. What will you do if the enemy tries to kill the soldier you're treating? Just let them die." Freen stayed silent, or rather she couldn't answer. This isn't some child's game. If you just want to play doctor, you're better off teaching kindergartners than being on a battlefield. Freen dropped her head, visibly discouraged. I sighed and added, "Still, I think it's admirable that you joined the military to save lives. Women aren't subject to conscription, so enlisting voluntarily takes a strong sense of sacrifice." "Thank you, sir." A faint smile appeared on Freen's face as she straightened up slightly. "Your words gave me strength, sir. I see now how immature I've been. For my father's honor as a priest, I'll make sure to work harder if I'm allowed back in training." She used "sir" again, but this time I decided to let it slide. It seemed more like a habit than deliberate formality, and since I wasn't her direct superior, there was no need to correct her. So her father was a priest, and that's why she hesitated to use firearms. I suppose it made sense, or did it? Wait a minute. A priest father, a woman from the South, reprimanded during training. It sounded uncomfortably similar to the backstory of an NPC I'd seen frequently in the game. Sweat beaded on my forehead as I looked at Freen. "Recruit, what's your full name?" "Oh, it's Freen, full name Freen Remilliard." Hearing her full name sent a chill down my spine. Freen Remilliard, the so-called saint of the Empire. Her signature ability was chanted magic, which buffed entire battlefields and turned soldiers into literal killing machines. Whenever she appeared on the battlefield, I'd order a retreat unless we had overwhelming numbers. Meeting such a named NPC in the detention center was shocking, but ultimately, it had nothing to do with me. Not like it matters, I'm getting discharged anyway. Once I left the Empire, I wouldn't see her again, so there was no reason to care. That's a pretty name. I gave a half-hearted response, and Freen blushed shyly. Judging by her reaction to such a simple compliment, it was clear she had little to no experience with men. What was she even doing here, instead of enjoying her youth? Then again, if I hadn't regained my past life memories at the command post, I probably would have thought military service was the highest honor too. Second Lieutenant Daniel Steiner. A sergeant appeared at the cell door, calling my name. I raised my hand, and after confirming my identity against the list, the sergeant unlocked the door. "You're being released, follow me." It was time. The higher-ups must have reviewed the situation and decided to proceed with a court-martial. Freen, who clearly didn't understand what was happening, blinked at me with wide, innocent eyes. "You're leaving already. It was an honor talking with you, sir." I nodded, forcing down the urge to cheer, and followed the sergeant out. We passed through the military police offices and exited the building, where Captain Philip Bender was waiting. He held a box that looked oddly elegant. "Ah, there you are." Philip greeted me with a warm smile. It felt wrong, but I saluted anyway, and he returned it casually before stepping closer. "I wanted to get you out sooner, but it took time to process everything. You've worked in the general staff, so I'm sure you understand." I did. The military was obsessed with paperwork and protocols. But something about his words unsettled me. He wanted to get me out sooner. Before I could ask, Philip handed me the box. "This is a reward for your service, Second Lieutenant Daniel Steiner, or should I say, First Lieutenant now." "What?" I blankly opened the box. Inside were 2 diamond insignias and rank epaulets for a first lieutenant. I looked up at Philip, who smiled proudly. "Your judgment was correct. Major Karl Heinrich was exposed as a spy for the Allied nations. As a result, the upper command decided to skip the promotion process and award you a field promotion." "A field promotion for me?" "Yes, the Empire believes in rewarding merit. Also, since the operations staff is temporarily vacant, you've been assigned as the acting operations officer." This had to be a joke. I assaulted my superior, only to find out he was a spy, and now I was promoted. It was completely absurd. "At this rate, you might even outrank me someday. Congratulations." But Philip's cheerful tone confirmed that this nightmare was real. I could only force a smile, shake his hand, and praise the Empire through gritted teeth. I returned to the Imperial General Staff after using the 1-week leave I received as a reward. The moment I stepped into the operations office, the staff members who had been chatting turned their gazes toward me. Before I could even process their reactions, they started gathering around me with smiles on their faces. "Lieutenant Daniel, our very own hero. Even if he was a spy, it must have taken guts to attack your commanding officer. That was incredible courage. 2 commendations back-to-back, truly impressive. Did you know your name? Been coming up frequently in upper command discussions." I didn't achieve those commendations because I wanted them, damn it. My insides were rotting away, but these people were celebrating without knowing the full story. It was suffocating. Please, enough with the praise. I was only acting out of loyalty to the Empire. Still, I couldn't just dismiss their goodwill. So I forced a smile and gave a humble reply. After exchanging greetings and pleasantries for what felt like an eternity, I finally made my way to my desk, the one previously occupied by Major Karl Heinrich. The desk had been completely cleared of Karl's personal belongings, leaving it spotless. On top of it were a few documents, a telephone, and a war map, but what stood out most was the nameplate. Acting Operations Officer / First Lieutenant Daniel Steiner. Even if it was a temporary position, Appointing a first lieutenant as an acting operations officer was highly unusual. Operations officer roles were prestigious enough to warrant private offices, positions rarely entrusted to someone of my rank. In other words, upper command now saw me as an exceptionally valuable asset. The fact that I had been promoted to first lieutenant just 3 months after my commission, and then assigned as acting operations officer was ridiculous. I wasn't just an elite, I was the elite of the elites. My career path wasn't just secure anymore, it was practically paved with roses. And that also meant my road to dishonorable discharge had become even more treacherous. As the sound of birds chirping drifted in through the window, I sat down and rubbed my temples. Why the hell is this happening to me? I genuinely felt like I was going to lose my mind. Chapter 5. I discreetly swallowed my frustration and straightened my posture while glancing around. I wasn't entirely sure how things had come to this, but as the so-called promising talent of the operations staff office, it wouldn't do to draw suspicion with any strange behavior. For now, I had no choice but to remain calm and focus on carrying out my duties while planning for the future. For now, the first order of business was to deal with the pile of documents in front of me. Letting out a low sigh, I picked up the papers neatly stacked beside the telephone and began reviewing their contents. Russell. Flipping through the pages, I found them to be fairly mundane. Most were requests for operational approvals or permissions to construct military facilities. The general process was for me to conduct an initial review, and as long as there were no logical issues, approve them before passing them up the chain of command. Operations Officer, play button. Operations Staff Chief, play button. Deputy Chief of Operations, play button. Headquarters Chief of Staff. Roughly speaking, that was the approval process. It wasn't particularly difficult work, so aside from a few documents requiring the reallocation of resources and personnel, I stamped approvals one after another. However, I froze when I opened the last document. Logistics Department Construction Approval Request. Recipient, Operations Staff Chief Colonel Ernst Barch. Sender, Logistics Staff Officer Captain Arnob Haupt. Date, March 16, 1944. Subject, request for approval and site selection for a Logistics Department construction on the Eastern Front. Responsible Officer, Operations Officer First Lieutenant Daniel Steiner. On the surface, it was just a standard approval request for the construction of a logistics facility. The problem was that I was listed as the responsible officer. Why? I couldn't understand it. The logistics department's role was to act as a central depot for receiving and redistributing supplies from rear logistics bases to the front lines. In other words, it was a critical hub for securing supply lines and preventing stockpiles from being left vulnerable. Logistics was so vital to warfare that it was often called the mother of war, and yet they assigned this responsibility to an operations officer, to a first lieutenant who had only recently been promoted through a battlefield commission and was barely holding onto his position. This must be some kind of clerical error. No matter how I looked at it, this was something that needed to be reported to the staff chief. Having made up my mind, I grabbed the documents and headed toward the chief's office within the operations staff office. Buried under piles of reports and paperwork, the staff chief looked up when he heard my footsteps. Oh, if it isn't our hero Daniel. Colonel Ernst Barch straightened his back with a hearty laugh, exuding the warmth of a friendly neighbor. But appearances could be deceiving. Anyone who had climbed to the rank of colonel in the Empire had undoubtedly been through countless battles and hardships. I only did what was necessary. Being called a hero feels a bit excessive. Humility was a virtue, regardless of the nation. Ernst seemed to appreciate my modesty as he smiled and spoke. "So, Lieutenant, what brings you here?" I completed the initial review of the documents sent to the office and came to report, sir. "Ah, already. I've heard you're quick on your feet. Let's have them." I nodded and placed the stack of documents on Ernst's desk. However, I didn't include the logistics request, and Ernst tilted his head when he noticed it. "And that one?" It was assigned to me, but the upper-level approval fields were left blank. It seems the logistics staff officer made a mistake. Ernst blinked a few times before bursting into laughter. Why was he laughing? "Ah, it's natural to find it odd, but that wasn't a mistake on his part." "If it wasn't a mistake, the upper brass intentionally gave you this assignment, partly because I've been swamped lately and needed to offload some work, and the other reason, well, I'm sure you can figure it out." My brows furrowed instinctively. This was a test. They wanted me to prove that capturing a spy and detecting enemy forces hidden in the hills weren't just flukes. Every officer understood the importance of logistics, but selecting the right site for a facility was no simple task. It had to be secure from enemy attacks while remaining easily accessible and capable of storing vast amounts of supplies. Clearly, they thought this was the perfect way to evaluate my competence as an operations officer. Who's behind this? Did the Chief of Staff set me up? I wasn't certain, but this was an opportunity. A golden opportunity to demonstrate my incompetence in the most spectacular way possible. If I constructed the logistics facility in an absurdly unsuitable location, my performance review would plummet. And with that, I could smoothly secure my discharge from the military. Feeling a surge of excitement, I snapped to attention and saluted Ernst. "Thank you for trusting me, sir. I'll do my best to complete the logistics facility." Ernst seemed satisfied with my enthusiasm and nodded with a smile. "Good, we'll make sure the budget is fully supported, so don't worry and get to work." "Understood, sir." While I replied confidently, I smirked inwardly. You'll regret this soon enough. I would make sure to build the logistics department in the most strategically disastrous location imaginable. 2 weeks later, rear lines of the Eastern Front. Bardenplatz Plains. Rumble. The ground seemed to tremble as heavy machinery rolled onto the plains, unloading construction materials. Captain Arnob Haupt, the logistics staff officer observing the scene from afar, was deeply unsettled. What the hell is headquarters thinking? Entrusting the construction of a logistics depot to a newly minted lieutenant. That damned officer had ordered the construction site to be on the Bardenplatz Plains, resulting in a massive drain on manpower and resources. Why here of all places? The Bardenplatz Plains were nothing but open, flat land, extremely vulnerable to enemy artillery fire. To counter that, they'd need to build additional defensive walls, which meant an enormous waste of materials. And the walls weren't the only problem. If they were going to build a logistics depot on open plains, it should at least be near existing roads. But there were no usable roads anywhere near the Bardenplatz Plains. That meant they'd have to lay new roads leading in and out of the site, effectively doubling the construction costs. It was a complete and utter waste of money. Daniel Steiner was it, that damned rookie. Because of a clueless junior officer who knew nothing about logistics, the Empire's treasury was being bled dry in real time. Arnob never considered himself particularly patriotic, but watching the nation's resources being squandered like this stirred a sense of nationalism he hadn't known he possessed. Still, as a mere logistics officer, there was no way he could defy headquarters' orders. Even though Daniel Steiner was of lower rank, his authority was undeniable. Arnob's growing frustration was proof of how powerless he felt. When Daniel had inspected the site a week ago and ordered the construction to proceed, Arnab hadn't voiced any objections. Despite his inner complaints, Arnab was, in the end, just another cog in the imperial bureaucracy. Orders are orders, what can I do? With a heavy heart, Arnab pulled out a cigarette and stuck it between his lips. As he lit it, the radio clipped to his shoulder crackled to life. "Logistics officer, can you hear me?" Of course, they always had to contact him when he was about to enjoy a smoke. Arnab picked up the receiver, pressed the button, and responded. "You forgot to state your rank and name again. How am I supposed to know who this is?" "Ah, you're so strict, it's Sergeant Winterenfeld. Satisfied now?" "Fine, what is it?" "Well, you know how we brought in specialists to conduct a geological survey before construction?" Arnab nodded. Conducting a ground survey before building anything was standard procedure. Ever since a past incident where a structure collapsed due to unstable ground, causing casualties, surveys had become mandatory. The specialists finished their analysis, and let me just say this. It's starting to make sense why headquarters put Lieutenant Daniel Steiner in charge. Huh? Arnab frowned, confused by the sudden change in tone from a sergeant who'd been badmouthing Daniel alongside him just the day before. "Get to the point. What's the result of the survey?" "Ha, here's the thing," the sergeant shouted excitedly. "Oil, it's oil. They found oil deposits under the site. And not just a little, there's enough to make drilling worthwhile." Arnab's cigarette slipped from his fingers. "What?" "Oil? There was oil under the Bardenplatz plains." If that was true, then the one who knew nothing about logistics was Daniel. It was Arnab himself. Letting out a hollow breath, Arnab wiped his face with his hand. Could it be? Did Lieutenant Daniel Steiner know about this from the very beginning? The thought made Daniel's brazen confidence suddenly make sense. Arnab let out a bitter chuckle and clasped his hands behind his back. Looks like the Empire had just gained a remarkable talent. Meanwhile, upon hearing the news that the Bardenplatz plains were an oil field, why, Daniel Steiner was panicking in real time. Chapter 6. I paused mid-drink and stared blankly at the soldier standing in front of me. His face was brimming with excitement and admiration for me, which made me feel uneasy. At first, I had been annoyed at the soldier for interrupting my relaxation at the officers' club after hours, but now I was consumed by a completely different emotion. He had just delivered news that the construction site for the logistics depot had turned out to be an oil field. Maybe I had misheard him. God, I hoped I had misheard him. Wiping the cold sweat off my brow, I set my glass down on the bar table and asked, "Soldier, could you repeat that one more time?" "Of course, sir. A massive oil deposit was discovered at the site where Lieutenant Daniel Steiner ordered the logistics depot to be built. Captain Arnab Haupt, the logistics officer, instructed me to deliver this news to you personally, sir." This soldier's voice was far too loud. He practically sounded like he was bragging about my achievement for everyone to hear. Thanks to him, not only the bartender but also several officers from other departments enjoying their leisure time had turned to look at me. Oil at the logistics site. Who found it? Don't tell me it was that rookie. Wait, isn't that Lieutenant Daniel Steiner? You don't know him. He's the guy who got promoted for catching a spy. The Central Intelligence Department took a hit to their reputation because of him, not to mention that Hill ambush incident. The stares and murmurs directed at me were becoming overwhelming. I'm not coming back to this club anytime soon. If I stayed here any longer, it would be like sitting on a bed of nails, so I rose from my seat. If what the logistics officer reported is true, I can't avoid inspecting the site. I adjusted my uniform and put on my cap, which had been resting on the bar table. I'll seek permission for a site inspection from the operations staff chief. Thank you for delivering the news, soldier. I tilted the brim of my cap slightly as I expressed my thanks, prompting the soldier to salute me energetically. He looked genuinely moved, though I couldn't fathom why. It's an honor to be of service to you, Lieutenant Steiner. I casually returned his salute and left the club, frowning to myself. The spot I specifically chose as the worst location turns out to be an oil field. What kind of nonsense is this? The logistics officer must have made a mistake. Yes, it had to be a mistake. Oil was one of the most critical strategic resources in war. Tanks, trucks, and aircraft all relied on it, and controlling oil fields could determine the outcome of a war. If this discovery were real, my position within the Imperial Army would become unshakable. In other words, my dream of a dishonorable discharge would drift even further out of reach. So please, let this report be a mistake. Unfortunately, it was. After 10 days of bureaucratic hurdles, I finally conducted the site inspection, only to find oil gushing out of the ground in the middle of the Bardenplatz plains. The sight of drilling rigs roaring as they operated made me grimace. Do you see that? That's the oil Lieutenant Daniel Steiner discovered. Ha ha, Sergeant Winter roared with laughter, raising his fist triumphantly. If I weren't an officer, he probably would have thrown an arm around my shoulder. When I first ordered the depot's construction here, this man had looked at me like I was human garbage. Now, the tables had turned. As I glared at Winter in annoyance, Captain Arnob Haupt, the logistics officer, spoke up. Lieutenant Steiner, on behalf of the logistics department, I want to thank you. According to reports, there's enough oil underground to supply the Empire for the next 27 years. This will be a formidable weapon for the Empire. Is that so? Yes. I've also contacted the railway department. We're planning to connect this logistics depot to the rail network to expedite oil transportation. That'll put an end to our reliance on imports. Wasn't this guy supposed to be a perpetually negative and irritable person? When we first met, Arnob had seemed practically nihilistic. Now his eyes were sparkling with hope and maybe even euphoria. Meanwhile, all I could do was sigh deeply. What was the point of earning merits in an empire doomed to lose? Arnob must have mistaken my sigh as one of relief over the Empire's newfound self-sufficiency, because he looked at me approvingly. You've only been commissioned for 4 months, and you've already achieved 3 major accomplishments. I wouldn't be surprised if another promotion comes your way soon. Sergeant Winter chimed in with a loud voice. Haha, that's right. At this rate, Lieutenant Steiner might outrank the captain before long. Now that'd be something to see. Watching the two of them get carried away speculating about my promotion was. Well, I appreciated the sentiment, but from my perspective, it was downright uncomfortable. You're too kind. I have no desire for any further promotions. The moment I said that, both men froze and stared at me. Did I say something wrong? Arnob cleared his throat and responded with surprising seriousness. I still have much to learn. Hearing you say you don't desire promotion makes me feel small for believing that dedication to the Empire should be rewarded. Lieutenant Daniel Steiner is a model soldier. How can someone be so noble-minded? Wait a minute. Weren't these the same people who treated me like a rookie during the first inspection? I was speechless, but I couldn't exactly blame them. Compared to me, both Arnob and Winter likely felt a stronger sense of loyalty to the Empire. From their perspective, my refusal to seek promotion, despite my accomplishments, probably seemed aristocratic and selfless. In reality, I simply wanted to get out of the army, but there was no need for them to know that. I saluted Arnob. Now that the inspection is complete, I'll return to headquarters to file my report. I trust you two will handle the depot construction from here. Leave it to us. Arnab returned my salute, and I lowered my hand before turning to leave. I climbed into the nearby military jeep, and the driver started the engine. As I adjusted my collar and glanced out the window, I noticed Arnab and Vinter still gazing at me with admiration. Feeling uncomfortable, I turned my head forward and spoke quickly. "Let's go." "Yes, sir." The driver stepped on the accelerator, and the jeep jolted forward. With the road still unpaved, the ride was bound to be rough. Gripping the handle above my seat, I glanced at the rearview mirror and broke into a cold sweat. Arnab and Vinter were still watching us. It felt like they were seeing off some high-ranking official. Yeah, I was definitely not coming back here. News of the oil discovery in the Bardenplatz plains spread like wildfire across the entire empire. In celebration of this monumental find, newspaper companies ran their presses day and night, while street boys shouted headlines and sold copies as fast as they could hand them out. Naturally, the imperial royal family was no exception to hearing the news. Is it true that a massive oil reserve was discovered in the Bardenplatz plains? Who exactly discovered it? The question came from Princess Sylvia von Amberg, a girl with sapphire blue eyes and golden hair that shone like sunlight on a spring day. Caspar Benedict, the quartermaster general, carefully set down his utensils in response. Despite the 4 stars gleaming on his epaulets, marking him as the commanding officer of logistics, Caspar was no more than a subordinate before the princess. "It is true, Your Highness. The heavens have indeed bestowed a precious gift upon the empire." "It wasn't the heavens," Sylvia interrupted. Caspar flinched, momentarily fearing the princess was about to commit blasphemy. However, that wasn't her intention. "It wasn't the heavens who discovered the oil in the Bardenplatz plains. It was a person. I'm asking you who that person is." "Your Highness, he is an insignificant orphan. It's hardly worth." Sylvia's eyes narrowed. "Quartermaster General, since when has the Empire judged merit based on birth, or have you forgotten that we are at war?" It was a thinly veiled command to answer her question properly. Caspar understood her point all too well and bowed his head before speaking. "To my knowledge, the one who discovered the oil reserve is First Lieutenant Daniel Steiner. He currently serves as the acting operations officer in the General Staff Office." A lieutenant, someone who was only a lieutenant, had discovered such a valuable resource. Sylvia, who had naturally assumed the discovery came from an elite official backed by vast resources and manpower, was genuinely taken aback. How interesting, on multiple levels. A man who was only a lieutenant likely had little to no political entanglements, a blank slate, so to speak. This meant there was no better time to recruit him as an ally. If he was truly as capable as the reports suggested, then she needed to secure his loyalty. The more talented people she had by her side, the better her chances of inheriting the throne. Daniel Steiner, whom? Tapping her fingers lightly against the dining table, Sylvia allowed a faint smile to cross her lips. "I'll have to meet him soon." Chapter 7. After a grueling journey back from the Bardenplatz plains, I stepped out of the vehicle, my entire body radiating exhaustion. I'm going to die. Aside from brief stops for meals and rest, I had spent nearly 3 days traveling nonstop. Even back at the academy, physical endurance tests had been a nightmare for me, so this kind of forced march was practically torture. I had hoped to avoid visiting the Eastern Front, but with the oil discovery, I had no choice but to inspect the site myself. And in the end, the black liquid unearthed in the Bardenplatz plains was indeed oil. Well, of course it was. The logistics officers weren't idiots. They could clearly tell the difference between sewage and crude oil. Still, I had insisted on the inspection to deflect headquarters' attention from me, even if just a little. Running around to verify the discovery myself would make me look more like a diligent rookie, rather than someone basking in his accomplishments back at the operations office. Not that it would do much to diminish the impact of this so-called achievement. Letting out a sigh, I loosened my tie and made my way toward the main building. As much as I wanted to collapse onto my dormitory bed, skipping a return report wasn't an option for a soldier. "Ah, Lieutenant Daniel Steiner, welcome back." When I entered the operations staff chief's office and saluted, Ernst greeted me with his ever-benevolent smile. I couldn't afford to let that smile fool me. Maintaining my salute, I opened my mouth to speak. "Reporting in, sir, after inspecting the Bardenplatz planes at the Eastern Front rear line. They found oil, didn't they? That's already common knowledge in headquarters and throughout the Empire, so there's no need for a formal report. Relax." Given permission, I lowered my salute and shifted to parade rest. "These days, everyone's singing your praises, Lieutenant. That includes the higher-ups. Discovering an oil field. That's an achievement even I and the so-called elites couldn't pull off." "You flatter me, sir." And it really was flattery. I hadn't set out to discover anything in the first place. But Ernst seemed to think I was just being modest, letting out a soft chuckle. "There have been a lot of suggestions to promote you again based on this discovery. I'm in favor of it myself, but things haven't been moving as smoothly as I'd hoped." "Objection, sir." "Yes. Officially, they claim it's because promoting someone twice in such a short period, especially without any actual combat experience, would be excessive. But personally, I think it's your background they're concerned about." Though Ernst phrased it diplomatically, the truth was clear. Some high-ranking officers were opposed to granting more authority to someone of orphan origins. I understood their reasoning. Even after the Kingdom of Bavaria rebranded itself as the Holy Bavarian Empire and abolished social class discrimination, traces of the old system remained deeply ingrained. The majority of the empire's political and military leaders were still descended from noble families, and many regions continued to be referred to as baronies and counties. In such a society, where the anti-discrimination law existed largely in name only, it was hardly surprising that a decorated officer with no noble lineage would face resistance. If I hadn't regained memories of my past life, I might have been enraged by their prejudice. Now, however, I could only feel gratitude toward those opposing voices. Blocking my promotion, I almost wanted to bow and thank them. "If that's the opinion of the higher-ups, then I'll comply," I said calmly, unaffected by the decision. Ernst gave me a look of admiration, as if surprised by my composure. "I thought you'd be upset. Impressive. Truly the model of a soldier. Now I see why Brigadier General Heinrich holds you in such high regard." With a chuckle, Ernst's expression suddenly turned serious as he looked me straight in the eye. "In a proper society, a man's rank should match his abilities. Wouldn't you agree, Lieutenant?" There was something about his tone that made it impossible to disagree, so I nodded. "Yes, sir." "Glad we're on the same page. On that note, I want you to head to the Northern Front." The Northern Front? What was he talking about? I froze for a moment, then quickly opened my mouth. "The Northern Front, sir." "Yes. As you know, the tide there has turned in our favor. It's the perfect time to make a name for yourself. Go there, rack up some accomplishments, and give the higher-ups the combat experience they're demanding. Problem solved." Ernst was clearly implying he had gone out of his way to set this up for me, but to me, it felt more like a death sentence. Anyone in my position, someone trying to secure a discharge, would want to scream at the prospect of being sent to the front lines. Still, I couldn't afford to let my panic show. Carefully, I asked, "Is this a permanent reassignment? Am I being transferred to a Northern Front unit?" "Of course not. You'll be attached as support to a unit directly under headquarters. Just go, gain some experience, and come right back. After that, Brigadier General Heinrich and I will push for your promotion." Leaning forward, Ernst lowered his voice as if sharing a secret. "When that happens, you'll no longer be acting as an assistant operations officer. You'll be a full operations officer with an aide to handle the paperwork. It'll make your life much easier." In short, he was saying he'd laid out the groundwork for my promotion, and all I had to do was endure a bit of hardship. I wanted to shout, "Why are you making decisions for me?" But there was a wall of rank between us that I couldn't climb. Still, not all hope was lost. "Sir, may I ask how the unit will be organized?" "Given your rank, it'll be a platoon-sized unit." "In that case, would it be possible for me to select the members myself?" Ernst blinked in surprise before clasping his hands together. "There's no reason you can't. Where are you planning to recruit from?" "Since the front lines are already struggling with manpower, I intend to recruit primarily from the rear." "Do you have specific individuals in mind?" "No, sir. I plan to issue an open recruitment notice and select from the applicants. Opportunities to serve in battle should be distributed fairly." Ernst seemed genuinely impressed by my answer and nodded in approval. "That's an excellent idea. Proceed with it." "Yes, sir." After saluting Ernst, I returned to my desk and sat down. Then I pulled out a pen and began drafting the notice. Northern Front Reinforcement Recruitment Notice. Attention, soldiers. A fierce battle to defend the sacred lands of our empire rages in the north. I seek those who are willing to lay down their lives for the empire. Heed this call. Covet not the grains of the empire in life, but become the foundation of its glory in death. Join me, fight until we have destroyed, crushed, and annihilated our enemies. We desire only the deaths of our foes. Number of positions available. Northern Front reinforcements, 20 soldiers. Eligibility requirements. Those willing to offer their hearts to the empire. Those who do not expect to survive battle. Those who wish to serve the empire, even if it means dying tomorrow. Commanding Officer. Lieutenant Daniel Steiner, Operations Officer. No combat experience but unparalleled dedication to the empire. Glory to the empire. Holy Bavarian Empire. General Staff Office, Northern Front Reinforcement Recruitment Center. Perfect. It was a masterpiece. Not a single word about survival, only death was emphasized. Human nature compels people to cling to life, so who in their right mind would sign up to die for the empire? I even highlighted my lack of combat experience. No fool would willingly join such a unit. The pampered soldiers in the rear would scoff at the notice, leading to abysmal recruitment numbers. And if the few applicants who did show up weren't good enough, I could just reject them with excuses. That would force Ernst to cancel the deployment and, by extension, my promotion. A win-win. After that, I could hole up in headquarters and figure out how to engineer my dishonorable discharge. Genius. Satisfied with my work, I grabbed the notice and headed to personnel. The next day, as usual, I arrived at work and began my routine when a knock sounded at the door. Looking up, I saw the personnel officer approaching with a folder in hand. "Lieutenant Daniel Steiner, about that notice you sent to the rear units yesterday." Seeing that he carried only a single folder, I assumed the recruitment drive had failed, or at least received minimal interest. Smirking internally, I made sure to appear outwardly disappointed. I suppose there aren't many soldiers willing to sacrifice for the empire. A shame. No, it's the opposite. The opposite. Before I could process what he meant, the personnel officer clapped his hands twice. "Bring them in." Suddenly, 5 soldiers entered, each struggling under the weight of stacks upon stacks of application forms. Congratulations! In just one day, you've received over 2,176 applications. It seems there's no need for further recruitment. He smiled as if expecting praise for my brilliant notice. But all I could think was, why the hell are so many people signing up for this? Chapter 8. Hearing the news that over 2,000 applicants had signed up, I sank into despair and questioned the personnel officer. I demanded to know why my recruitment notice was being called a well-written announcement. Smiling, the personnel officer patiently explained, even counting on his fingers as he spoke. The prolonged war against the Allied nations had created a generation of orphans who grew up fueled by a thirst for revenge, leading to a surge in enlistments. Lieutenant Daniel Steiner's recruitment notice poured fuel on that fire, stoking their desire for vengeance and naturally increasing applications. Furthermore, the Northern Front was already tilting in the Empire's favor. Many soldiers likely saw this as an opportunity to distinguish themselves in a winning battle. The language portraying rear-line troops as freeloaders probably provoked resentment. Some likely took the notice seriously and applied out of a sense of honor. Lastly, setting aside logical explanations, there was something about Lieutenant Steiner's notice that struck a chord in men's hearts. Having laid out 5 reasons, the personnel officer concluded by complimenting me, saying I had a talent for propaganda. He even suggested I let him know if I ever wanted to transfer to the personnel office. I awkwardly smiled in response to his job offer, dismissed him, and then ordered the soldiers to sort through the applications. It was impossible to reject over 2,000 applicants outright, so going to the Northern Front was all but guaranteed. Given the circumstances, my best course of action was to select the most competent and elite soldiers to ensure my safety. I began by filtering out the unfit candidates. Anyone with even a minor criminal record, rejected. Anyone motivated purely by revenge, rejected. Anyone displaying questionable ideology or signs of mental instability, rejected. Anyone who had disobeyed a superior's orders during training, rejected. Anyone who failed to achieve a perfect score in marksmanship tests, rejected. Anyone lacking aptitude for magic, rejected. After the initial screening, only 327 applicants remained. From that pool, I carefully selected the most outstanding and disciplined candidates, narrowing it down to 20 soldiers. I sent out acceptance notices, and now, 10 days later, I stood in front of them. The 20 soldiers I had chosen were lined up in 2 rows of 10 by the fountain at the entrance to the General Staff headquarters. Their presence was strangely intimidating. Especially their eyes, they were terrifying. If I exaggerated a little, they looked like men who'd charge headfirst into enemy fire without hesitation if ordered. Even if I picked them myself, are these guys even human? Cold sweat ran down my back before I realized it. Of course, not all of them looked like soulless war machines. Among the towering men, a single woman blinked at me with clear, bright eyes. Freen Remilliart, the same woman I had met in the detention cell, the future saint of the Empire, and a named NPC. She must have completed training without issue, as she now wore the rank insignia of a private. I had selected her without much thought when I saw her name on the list. But now, seeing her innocent gaze burning with enthusiasm among these hardened soldiers reminded me of a lunatic with a glassy stare. Had I made a mistake picking her? Suppressing my unease, I cleared my throat. Welcome, soldiers. It was the commander's duty to explain the mission, at least briefly, before departure. And right now, I was fulfilling that role. Deep down, though, I hoped my words might scare some of them into quitting. As you've seen in the notice, I'm Lieutenant Daniel Steiner, your platoon leader and acting operations officer. Let me remind you in case you missed it, I have no combat experience. I had just admitted that I might be incompetent, yet no one stirred. Fine, you want to stay, let's turn up the pressure. So don't expect me to be a capable leader. My only desire is the annihilation of the Allied forces and the screams of the savages who stand with them. I was making it abundantly clear that I lacked any sense of strategy or tactics. Any sane soldier would feel fear at this point. And yet the men began to grin fierce, predatory smiles. Staring at them in silence for a moment, I then snapped sharply. I have no use for cowards. If you want to flee from the bloody battlefield, now's your only chance. Anyone who wants to back out, raise your hand. As expected, not a single hand went up. These bastards were insane. I let out a sigh and delivered my final words. Fine, you reckless fools willing to challenge death. I'll make sure you get what you want. Your sweat and blood will bring glory to the Empire. The moment I finished, the soldiers roared in unison. Glory to the Empire! Their unified voices echoed across the General Staff headquarters. Closing my eyes, I let out a faint groan. This is insane. There really was no other way to describe them. They were absolute lunatics. 4 days later. Northern Front, temporary outpost of the 307th Special Operations Unit. Today's the day the reinforcements from headquarters are supposed to arrive. Captain Heinz Schmidt, commander of the 307th Special Operations Unit, leaned back in his chair and pulled out the recruitment notice he had read earlier. Northern Front Reinforcement Recruitment Notice. Attention, soldiers. A fierce battle to defend the sacred lands of our empire rages in the north. I seek those who are willing to lay down their lives for the empire. Heed this call. Covet not the grains of the empire in life, but become the foundation of its glory in death. Join me, fight until we have destroyed, crushed, and annihilated our enemies. We desire only the deaths of our foes. This reeks of madness. Heinz had seen all kinds of insanity during his time in the Special Operations Unit. Assassinations, high-profile eliminations, counter-terror operations. But even he found this notice unnerving. This doesn't read like a call for comrades. It felt more like an invitation for disposable tools to be used and discarded for the Empire. Lieutenant Daniel Steiner was it. According to his adjutant, this man had already achieved 3 remarkable accomplishments, earning a rapid promotion to lieutenant. Yet, unsatisfied with his current position, he had volunteered to come to the Northern Front. There was only one conclusion to draw from that. A promotion-obsessed warmonger. To Heinz, Lieutenant Daniel Steiner seemed like the kind of man who wouldn't hesitate to use his own troops as stepping stones for personal gain. The thought left an uncomfortable weight in his chest, but Heinz clenched his fists and shook his head. It's wrong to judge someone based on rumors. A person's true nature could only be understood through direct interaction. Steeling his resolve, Heinz looked up as a soldier entered the tent and saluted. Captain, the reinforcements from headquarters have arrived. Heinz nodded. Understood, let's go meet them. Tucking the notice back into his pocket, Heinz stood up. On his way out, he glanced at a girl quietly reading a book nearby. She seemed engrossed, so Heinz decided not to interrupt her. He simply nodded politely in her direction before stepping outside. The blinding snow reflected the sunlight as Heinz spotted the platoon marching toward the outpost. The 20 soldiers exuded an intense, almost oppressive presence. Even officers and soldiers of the Special Operations Unit, hardened by countless missions, instinctively stepped back as the group passed. Leading this intimidating force was none other than Lieutenant Daniel Steiner. With hollow, bloodshot eyes that gave no hint of emotion, He stared straight ahead as if nothing in the world could faze him. Then, when their eyes met, Hines felt an inexplicable stiffness in his body. Daniel frowned slightly, then seemed to realize Hines was the commanding officer and saluted. Hines returned the salute with a tense expression as Daniel approached with a thin smile. "It's an honor to meet you, Captain Heinz Schmidt. You know my name." "Yes, I did some research about the unit I'd be assigned to. This unit has carried out some truly remarkable missions. I can already see why I was sent here." "I appreciate the compliment. It must have been a tough journey to get here. Are you and your men not exhausted?" Daniel let out a low chuckle and shook his head. "Those suicidal maniacs. Don't worry about them. I've been watching them for days. They don't know how to get tired." The words suicidal maniacs sent a chill down Heinz's spine. "As I thought, he treats his soldiers like expendable tools." In reality, Daniel had only meant to lighten the mood with a joke, but Heinz, already clouded by bias, began to see him as some kind of devil. "Captain Heinz." Unaware of Heinz's internal thoughts, Daniel tilted his head at the captain's stiff expression. That was when it happened. "What's all the commotion?" The flap of the tent behind Heinz opened, and a blonde girl stepped out. Dressed in a pristine white blouse with a red brooch at her neck, she looked every bit the daughter of a noble family. Daniel's gaze naturally shifted toward her, and when their eyes met, he froze. Noticing his reaction, Heinz quickly introduced her. "Oh, this is our embedded war correspondent. She arrived a few days ago and said she wanted to document the Imperial Army's efforts with her camera." Despite Heinz's explanation, Daniel couldn't take his eyes off her. Sensing his gaze, the girl smiled warmly. At that moment, Daniel felt as if his entire body had turned to ice. A war correspondent? No, that was impossible. Daniel knew exactly who this girl was. "Why are you here?" The girl standing before him was no ordinary civilian. She was Sylvia von Amberg, the Imperial Princess, the future ruler of the Empire. Chapter 9. Why is the Imperial Princess disguising herself as a war correspondent deep within the battlefield? Daniel felt a strong sense of unease but quickly masked it, putting on a composed expression as he extended his right hand. "Nice to meet you. I am First Lieutenant Daniel Steiner, Acting Operations Officer of the General Staff Headquarters. If the princess is concealing her identity and present on the Northern Front, there must be a significant reason." Blurting out something like, "Your Highness the Princess," in such a situation would only make things worse. Sylvia studied Daniel carefully before extending her hand and accepting his handshake. "I'm Ravi Emilia, a war correspondent. Please feel free to call me Ravi." Daniel nodded, ended the handshake, and released her hand. To avoid arousing unnecessary suspicion, he decided to maintain only the level of courtesy appropriate for addressing a war correspondent. "Well then," Daniel turned to Heinz and spoke. "Could you brief me on the operation?" The words were an attempt to shift the topic, as he found the princess's gaze too burdensome. However, from Heinz's perspective, Daniel asking about the mission outline before even settling in made him come across as ruthless. As expected, he's not someone to be taken lightly. With that thought, Heinz nodded and turned around. "Follow me. I'll give you a brief explanation of the mission." Inside the tent Heinz led them into, the first thing that caught their eyes was a table with an operation map laid out. Against the wall, soldiers sat in front of radios, awaiting communication orders. To the side, a blackboard displayed photographs of Allied officers, along with detailed notes on their identities and recent movements. As Daniel studied the board, Heinz began to speak. "He's the adjutant of the Allied Northern Front Corps. His rank is colonel, and his name is Jeremy Stringer. He's the target we need to eliminate in this mission." Daniel shifted his gaze to Hines with a look of doubt. His expression seemed to question how they planned to assassinate such a high-profile target, guarded by numerous escorts. If their positions were reversed, Hines thought, he might have worn the same expression. Letting out a low laugh, Hines said, "As you're aware, the Northern Front formed after the Kingdom of Eldresia joined the Allies. Those barbarian bastards didn't know their place and invaded Imperial territory with 3 divisions. But the Imperial army did not retreat." "Exactly. Gloriously, we not only held our ground but also recaptured most of the lost territory, overwhelming the Allies. In the process, the enemy leadership retreated en masse, although some remained to resist." Hines's explanation boiled down to a single point. "It's a delaying tactic." At Daniel's remark, Hines nodded. "I don't want to praise the enemy, but it was a sharp move. Thanks to Colonel Jeremy Stringer's efforts to buy time, the Allied leadership on the Northern Front managed to retreat with minimal losses. However, he's now isolated." Hines let out a low laugh. It was closer to a sneer. "Colonel Jeremy Stringer may be sharp, but he doesn't seem to have much courage. Once he confirmed the leadership's retreat, instead of making a last stand, he decided to run. He's like a rat." "Exactly. Just as you said, that rat recently sent 2 battalions into battle and then slipped away with a company-sized escort. The Central Intelligence Bureau had detected this movement and passed down orders to Hines, who was operating at the front lines. To summarize the orders from headquarters, set a trap in the rat's escape route, wait and kill him. Understood?" It was simple and clear, something even an idiot could grasp. Getting straight to the point, Daniel asked, "Then what are the expected escape routes?" Hines, as if waiting for this question, picked up a baton and pointed to the operation map on the table. Several possible escape routes were marked in red. The first route is the Drokenberg Highlands. Its high elevation and sparse population make it ideal for avoiding pursuit. Since roads can't be used, crossing the highlands is the fastest way back to Allied territory. Hines tapped the map again, pointing to another location. The second expected route is through the northwestern highlands and into the snowy mountains. By bypassing Alder Lake and hiding in the jungle, aerial reconnaissance would be impossible, making it the best route for stealth. Hines finished his explanation and set down the baton. "Unfortunately, we'll have to choose one of these 2 routes to ambush him. If we split our forces, the chance of losing Jeremy increases." Hines's words seemed to challenge Daniel, asking which route he thought Jeremy would take. Daniel rubbed his chin and stared at the operation map. "Wait a second, isn't this a perfect chance for a dishonorable discharge? If I suggest a completely different plan and intentionally screw up the operation, my evaluation will plummet. And if I prove my incompetence in front of the princess." Dishonorable discharge confirmed. It felt as if fanfare was blaring inside his head. Daniel hid his smirk, maintaining a serious demeanor as he shook his head. "In my opinion, Colonel Jeremy Stringer won't choose either of these routes." By outright rejecting Hines's assessment, Daniel caused silence to descend over the room. Sylvia, who had been watching their exchange, looked at Daniel with amusement. Meanwhile, Hines frowned, clearly puzzled. "Can you explain exactly what you mean?" "Yes, I believe Jeremy will escape through the Edelkraal Gorge." "The Edelkraal Gorge? Don't be ridiculous. That area was mined early in the war to block the Allied advance. Jeremy knows this." Daniel met Hines's eyes directly. "Because it's such an unreasonable route, Jeremy will take it. Do you think he doesn't understand that exploiting the Empire's blind spot is his only chance of survival?" His absolute confidence momentarily caused Hines to hesitate. but Hines had no intention of indulging Daniel's reckless idea. "Lieutenant, rationality is the principle of the Imperial Army. The Special Operations Unit isn't idle enough to humor your gambles. If that's your decision, Captain Hines, I will obey, but you must be prepared." "And prepared for what?" In response to Hines's question, Daniel didn't blink as he replied, "Even if I'm temporarily attached to this unit, I still command forces directly under headquarters. If we lose Colonel Jeremy Stringer due to your judgment, I'll have no choice but to report this to the General Staff. The General Staff is watching you." Hearing Daniel's words, Hines couldn't help but feel the pressure. Indeed, Daniel knew exactly how to wield his connections. Suppressing a low sigh, Hines barely managed to speak. "Lieutenant, you mustn't speak so lightly. What will you do if Jeremy doesn't come through Edelcrawl Gorge?" "I will accept any disciplinary action. Furthermore." Daniel paused for a moment before continuing, "Please permit me to take only my platoon and set up an ambush in Edelcrawl Gorge." "Are you saying you'll take down Jeremy's company with just a single platoon?" "Yes. After prolonged battles on the northern front, Jeremy's company is likely suffering from low morale and exhaustion. Combined with the terrain's natural advantages, my platoon is more than capable of defeating them." According to Daniel's reasoning, splitting the forces and ambushing both routes was feasible. Hines, staring into Daniel's determined eyes, turned to Sylvia. Sylvia, smiling with intrigue, gave a slight nod. Seeing this, Hines furrowed his brows and reluctantly approved Daniel's audacity. "Fine. If you insist, I'll authorize the operation. Take your platoon and lie in wait at Edelcrawl Gorge when the time comes." "Yes, thank you." Daniel gave a crisp salute and turned to leave the tent. Only then did it feel as though the suffocating tension in the air had eased. What a snake of a man! As Hines stared at the tent's entrance where Daniel had left, Sylvia spoke up nearby. "Captain Hines, what do you think of Daniel Steiner?" Hines turned and bowed slightly. "Your Highness, in my opinion, he's an excellent soldier. His judgment, decisiveness, and courage are exceptional, but I wouldn't call him a good person." To Hines, Daniel seemed completely devoid of respect for others. Taking on the mission with only his platoon, it looked like he was trying to hog all the glory. He seemed like a devil, dragging himself and his subordinates toward disaster just for promotion. That was Hines's impression of him. "Therefore, Your Highness, I urge you to reconsider aligning yourself with Lieutenant Daniel Steiner. He is a man who cannot respect others. From my experience, people like him do not meet good ends." Despite Hines's sincere advice, Sylvia's interest was only piqued further. "Captain Hines, there's no dog or man in this world that can't be tamed." Sylvia's gaze softened as she looked in the direction Daniel had gone. "Besides, whether or not he's truly incapable of respecting others, I'll judge that for myself." The next day, Edelcrawl Gorge. "It's freezing." I shivered atop the cliff of the gorge. Even with my officer's winter coat, it felt like the cold was seeping through the fabric. "I just want to botch this mission and head back to headquarters already." Sniffling quietly, I glanced to the side and saw Freen monitoring the gorge through binoculars. Sylvia sat nearby on a fallen log. The rest of the platoon had camouflaged themselves using snow and dry branches. But seriously, why is Sylvia here? Still pretending to be a war correspondent, she was holding a Leica camera. Honestly, it was absurd. What kind of war correspondent dresses that neatly? Her blouse, coat, and pants were all expensive, high-end pieces. She probably didn't even realize how extravagant her outfit looked, since she was used to wearing such clothes. I was thinking how out of place she seemed when our eyes suddenly met. Seeing that she was about to speak, I quickly turned my head and cleared my throat. "Do you see any enemy movement?" Freen shook her head at my question. No, Lieutenant Daniel Steiner, sir. Of course she didn't. This area was a position I had insisted on taking, a position chosen specifically to fail. It was a plan to secure a dishonorable discharge. Why would Jeremy come here? He'd have to be insane. While the gorge allowed for covert movement through shadowed areas, it also meant being trapped between two cliffs, completely vulnerable to ambush. Moreover, Jeremy knew that the Imperial Army had mined this area. The odds of him coming here were slim to none. In other words, my plan was destined to fail. Not just a failure, a spectacular one. I had practically blackmailed Hines into agreeing to this operation, so I'd be subjected to severe criticism. And with the princess witnessing my incompetence firsthand, it'll be the perfect disaster. They say crisis breeds opportunity. Who would have thought my unwanted promotion to the Northern Front would turn into a golden chance for a dishonorable discharge? I was so pleased with myself that I couldn't help but smile. Lieutenant Daniel Steiner, sir. Hearing the panicked voice, I turned to see Freen lowering her binoculars and looking up at me. You were right. Colonel Jeremy Stringer's company is entering the gorge. Wait, what? Chapter 10. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard, but Freen's eyes were filled with certainty. Give me the binoculars. Yes, sir. Taking the binoculars from Freen, I scanned the entrance of the gorge, frowning. Just as Freen had said, a company-sized force was advancing. But why were they entering Edelcrawl Gorge, which was mined? Puzzled, I inspected their formation and let out a hollow laugh. They're marching in a single-file column. 2 soldiers are walking far ahead of the rest. The 2 leading soldiers were effectively being used as a mine-clearing unit. If no explosions occurred along their path, it meant the area was clear of mines. The rest of Jeremy's troops were simply following in their footsteps. And those soldiers in the lead don't look like they volunteered. I zoomed in further and saw their faces filled with fear. Would anyone trembling like that willingly volunteer to lead the charge? Definitely not. It was obvious they'd been forced into it, likely under threat. Shifting the binoculars slightly, I noticed a soldier about 30 meters behind aiming a rifle at the lead pair. Leave the formation and be shot on the spot. Jeremy had almost certainly issued such an order. He's using his men's lives to check for mines. It was the kind of demonic calculation only war could produce. Not that it was shocking, history had seen far worse. Sighing, I lowered the binoculars and glanced around as I spoke. Target approaching, all squads prepare for combat. The moment I finished speaking, the soldiers crouched and drew their rifles. Then they checked the monocylinders attached to their shoulders. The cylindrical devices, filled with various mechanisms and gauges, were the Empire's cutting-edge weapons. Their function was to store mana in advance, allowing soldiers to access up to twice their normal mana reserves during combat. It meant Imperial soldiers could fight twice as effectively as those from other nations. Of course, this was a theoretical calculation, but the monocylinder, hailed as the pinnacle of Magitech, had undeniably cemented the Empire's status as a superpower. Realistically, no country can win a full-scale war against the Empire. But that overwhelming strength had also fueled fear and resentment among neighboring nations, which bordered the Empire. As I adjusted my own monocylinder and checked the gauge, I thought again about why I wanted to escape this Empire in the first place. After confirming there were no issues, I lay prone at the edge of the cliff, aiming my rifle. The soldiers followed my lead, positioning themselves along the cliffside. Watching Jeremy's company advance deeper into the gorge, I whispered loud enough for my men to hear. I'll take the enemy commander. The moment I fire, block their escape route with suppressive fire. Prepare magic rounds. Prepare magic rounds. In low voices, the soldiers echoed my command, channeling mana into their ammunition. Infusing bullets with mana temporarily enhanced their destructive power and penetration. Magic bullets outperformed most spells and required no complicated chants, just a bit of mana infusion. Like how firearms had rendered medieval knights obsolete, the rise of magic bullets had reduced most spells to relics of the past, except for a few practical ones. It was a prime example of technology, erasing romantic ideals. But still, if I killed Colonel Jeremy here, wouldn't that just earn me another medal? With the princess watching from behind, I couldn't just stand idly by. But if I achieved another victory, my chance to escape the Empire would vanish. What should I do? Feeling Sylvia's gaze, I opened my rifle's scope. Bracing the rifle stock against my shoulder, I peered through the scope and spotted Colonel Jeremy walking in the center of the formation. The scope's magnification wasn't high enough to make out his face clearly, but the one wearing a high-ranking officer's uniform was undoubtedly him. If I killed him, I'd be promoted again. That was unacceptable. I couldn't let myself get further entangled with the Empire. Then, I just needed to act like an idiot who missed his shot, even with a golden opportunity. Having made up my mind, I shifted my aim slightly, targeting the soldier walking beside Jeremy instead. Taking a deep breath, I held it, infused mana into the bullet and pulled the trigger. Bang! The bullet tore through the air and pierced the soldier's head. Immediately, my platoon's gunfire erupted, deafening the air as it rained down on the enemy. Glancing briefly, I saw about 17 Allied soldiers collapsing in sprays of blood. It was an excellent opening volley. But Jeremy was still alive. If the enemy counted the fallen bodies and realized we only had a platoon, they'd figure it out quickly. And Jeremy wasn't stupid. He'd deploy a mana barrier and either charge forward or retreat. Many of his men would die in the process, but a man who used his subordinates as human mind detectors wouldn't care. If Jeremy escaped, I'd fail the mission and could finally get discharged. Come on, Colonel Jeremy, run. I peered through the scope, watching Jeremy's company flounder in confusion. Then, to my disbelief, an officer began shouting orders and dropped his weapon. Why are they dropping their weapons? Unable to make sense of it, I watched as soldiers started kneeling one by one and raising their hands. It was a clear sign of surrender. They had no intention of continuing the fight. Freen, who had been firing alongside me, tilted her head in confusion. They're surrendering. No, it could be a trick. They might attack the moment we move down. Before I could finish, the officer shouted something again and threw his rifle into the minefield. The soldiers followed, tossing their weapons into the mined area as well. It's a genuine surrender. What the hell is going on? I had no idea, but with the enemy surrendering, the operation was effectively over. Everyone get up, we're moving in to capture them. Descending into the gorge, I ordered my platoon to tie up the prisoners before walking over to Colonel Jeremy and demanding an explanation. Specifically, I asked him to explain why they had surrendered. You killed the colonel. Jeremy, no, the man dressed in Colonel Jeremy's uniform, glared at me and shouted. We were ambushed, and if you knew enough to identify the uniform switch, then it was clear we had no chance of winning. Moving forward meant stepping into a minefield, and retreating meant dying like dogs. In short, the soldier I killed with my first shot had actually been Colonel Jeremy in disguise. Losing their commander in an instant, the company assumed we had the upper hand in intelligence and firepower, and their morale collapsed, leading to their surrender. Oh, damn it! Running a hand down my face in disbelief, I saw one of the enemy soldiers clench his fists in frustration. Damn it, "You Imperial bastards! If we'd known you were just a single platoon, we would have fought back. You devilish son of a—" Thud! The soldier crumpled into the snow as Freen struck him in the neck with the butt of her rifle. Freen, her gaze cold as she looked down at the fallen soldier, turned to me and saluted. "Sir, we've captured 87 prisoners, excluding the 18 killed in action." Hearing Freen's report made the reality sink in. We defeated an entire company with a single platoon. I let out a frosty breath, staying silent as Freen added cautiously, "Aren't you happy, sir?" "Ah, of course, this level of success must be routine for you, Lieutenant. I apologize for my mistake." "What the hell is this woman talking about?" As I frowned, the sound of a camera shutter click echoed through the air. I flinched and turned toward the source, only to find Sylvia standing there. Lowering her camera, she gazed at me with an expression of admiration. "Congratulations. Your operation planning and execution were flawless, including the elimination of your target." "Wait, that photo you just took. When we return to the capital, I'll request, that it be published in the papers. A war hero who took down a company with just a platoon. I'll make sure you get the recognition you deserve." I wanted to tell her not to do it, but the person standing before me was the Imperial Princess. Refusal wasn't an option. Seeming to grow even fonder of me, Sylvia took a step closer and playfully nudged my waist. "So, how does it feel to become a war hero?" It felt like absolute hell. But there was no way I could say that to the Imperial Princess. Suppressing my emotions, I responded as neutrally as possible. "I simply did what was expected for the Empire. Calling me a war hero is far too much. This was just one of many battles taking place on the front lines, and I'm concerned that publicizing it might seem excessive." It was my roundabout way of asking her not to spread news of this battle. But upon hearing my words, Sylvia looked momentarily surprised before breaking into a soft smile. "I see. You're every bit the model soldier I've heard about. It makes me want to recruit you even more." Why did it feel like she'd misunderstood something? Was it just my imagination? Chapter 11. This is Kingfisher. Target eliminated. Returning to the temporary forward base. It was a transmission received by Hines, who had been waiting at the Drokenberg Highlands. This meant Hines's rational prediction had been wrong, and Daniel's intuition had been right. Hines wanted to believe it was a lie, but he knew there was no way Daniel, obsessed with earning accolades, would file a false report. Responding with an acknowledgement, Hines withdrew from the Highlands and returned to the forward base, where he witnessed Daniel's results firsthand. Unbelievable. In the clearing, prisoners wearing Allied uniforms were kneeling in rows. Even at a glance, there were over 80 of them, guarded by no more than 20 Imperial soldiers. It was such an unrealistic sight that Hines felt like he was looking at something out of a dream. Hines's aide was just as stunned by Daniel's achievement. "Lieutenant Daniel actually took down a company with a single platoon. How is that even possible?" It wasn't entirely impossible. Rare but not unheard of, there were historical examples of Davids defeating Goliaths. But still, had any David ever taken Goliath alive as prisoners? Hines couldn't comprehend how a platoon of 20 had not only defeated, but also forced a company to surrender. Moreover, the captured Allied company included 5 officers and 7 non-commissioned officers. One of the officers was even field grade. The intelligence they could extract from these prisoners alone made this a monumental achievement. As Hines gazed at the prisoners groaning in the snow, he sensed someone approaching and looked up. Daniel stood there saluting. "You've returned, Captain Hines." Hines returned the salute, speaking with disbelief still lingering in his voice. Incredible. How did you capture them all? Oh, I'd say it was just luck. Though Daniel meant it sincerely, Hines only saw it as false modesty. They say modesty is a virtue in the empire. If I didn't know his true nature, I might have been fooled too. Growing more wary of Daniel, Hines cleared his throat. Enough with the luck nonsense. What kind of platoon defeats a company purely by chance? This is your achievement. I disagree. Daniel spoke with a serious expression. I merely reached my conclusion based on Captain Hines's assessment and the Central Intelligence Bureau's data. The credit should go to you and the Intelligence Bureau. Daniel was practically begging Hines not to report his success to headquarters. But to Hines, it came across as a calculated move to flatter superiors and secure promotions. Lowering himself while praising his superiors, he's disarming even the most rigid officers. Not only is he brilliant at commanding troops, but he also knows how to maneuver politically. Hines felt a chill run down his spine. This man was a monster obsessed with promotion. Suppressing his unease, Hines replied in a low voice. That won't happen. I don't submit false reports. Your success will be reported as it is, so enjoy your victory. Daniel's eyebrow twitched. Damn it, can't you take the damn credit, you dense bastard? Any other officer would have gladly accepted the accolades, but this inflexible fool refused to steal his subordinates' achievements. It was suddenly clear why Hines, despite his competence, held such a low rank. Daniel sighed inwardly, but kept his face neutral. If that's your decision, sir, I'll comply. Good. With the operation now complete, you're dismissed. Get some rest. I'll handle the prisoners and make arrangements to return to headquarters by noon tomorrow. Thank you for your consideration. Recognizing that the conversation was over, Daniel snapped off a salute. It's been an honor to work with you, Captain Heinz Schmidt. The honor is mine. It was a privilege to have a soldier as capable as you under my command. Hines returned the salute, and Daniel turned and walked toward his tent. Watching Daniel's back, Hines's aide spoke with admiration. The rumors were true. The lieutenant sent by headquarters is an exceptional elite. Not only is his operational ability flawless, but his respect for superiors is impeccable. You're not wrong, but you're missing the bigger picture. Gazing at Daniel's retreating figure, Hines muttered under his breath. That man is a monster that will one day devour this empire. The next day, after delivering a detailed report on yesterday's battle to Hines, I headed to the clearing in the forward base at noon. In the clearing, military jeeps and transport vehicles were parked, and the platoon members had gathered around, chatting. Eavesdropping slightly, I caught snippets of them marveling over how incredible the battle had been. I could also hear the occasional praise directed at me, definitely not just my imagination. Freen, who had been talking with the others, approached me. Lieutenant Daniel, good afternoon. Did you finish your report? Yeah, but what exactly were you all so excited about? We were discussing how incredible of a commander you are, leading us to victory without a single casualty in our first battle, against an enemy company no less. That's amazing. Freen's sparkling eyes were unbearably overwhelming. Frowning slightly, I spoke to her. You're all spouting nonsense. It's time to return to headquarters, so get in the vehicle. Yes, sir, I'll let them know right away. Saluting briskly, Freen returned to the platoon and relayed my orders. The soldiers turned to salute me, before climbing into the military transport vehicles. Were they too caught up in their first victory? I sighed and began walking toward the jeep, only to stop in my tracks. A woman stood there, hands clasped behind her back, waiting for me. Dressed in a pristine white blouse and coat, Sylvia glanced around before spotting me and speaking naturally. Lieutenant Daniel, are you returning to headquarters? Yes, and Then let's go together. I have business at headquarters as well. What? Why the hell is she coming with me? For a moment, I was too dumbfounded to respond. After quickly running through excuses in my head, I spoke carefully. Miss, this military vehicle prioritizes performance over comfort. It's not suited for long-distance travel, especially for a lady. I'm fine. It's wartime after all. Being able to ride in a functioning vehicle at all is already a blessing. I don't care if you're fine. I'm not fine with this. I couldn't very well make the princess drive herself, which meant I'd have to endure the fatigue of driving her to headquarters. Lieutenant Daniel. But how could I refuse the imperial princess? Sighing quietly in defiance, I nodded. If you insist, then please get in. I'll drive. Sylvia nodded and climbed into the passenger seat. Muttering complaints under my breath, I got into the driver's seat and started the engine. As I pressed the accelerator, the transport vehicles behind us followed. About an hour into the drive, Sylvia spoke. Lieutenant Daniel, what do you think about the state of this war? The sudden question caught me off guard. But it was the kind of question an imperial princess might naturally ask. Surrounded by generals and officers constantly shouting, "The Empire will win." This must have been her chance, disguised as a war correspondent, to hear an honest opinion from a lower-ranking officer. It won't be easy. I figured I could at least give her some advice. Sylvia looked at me like she didn't understand. What do you mean it won't be easy? The Empire has practically won on the Northern Front. We're hearing victory reports from the Eastern Front as well. At this rate, the Empire will win the war against the Allies. Yes, assuming no third-party nations intervene. Sylvia didn't understand the horrors of a world war. That's why she could speak so casually. If the Empire defeats the Allies and claims their resources, what do you think will happen? Sylvia's expression turned serious. Obviously, we'll become the dominant power, a hegemon above all nations. Yes, if everything goes well, the Empire might even lay the groundwork for unifying the world. But the problem is that other major powers know this too. The great powers feared the Empire's growing strength. They also saw the Allies' downfall as a potential preview of their own futures. Fear and paranoia would ignite the flames of war against the Empire. Nations that saw conflict as inevitable would rush to declare war, and their target would be none other than the Empire will become the enemy of the world. This, ultimately, was why the Empire would lose to the Allied forces. Sylvia's expression darkened. She seemed to be processing my words, weighing their rationality. It must have been a shock to hear something so drastically different from the general's unwavering optimism. For all I knew, she might decide I was paranoid and lash out. But instead, she considered my opinion. I see. That's certainly one possibility. But Lieutenant Daniel Steiner, how exactly did you arrive at that conclusion? I didn't get the chance to answer. Out of the corner of my eye, I spotted something glinting in the sunlight ahead, sharpened spikes scattered across the road. Spike strips. Snapping to attention, I urgently turned the wheel, veering off onto a side path. Clunk. The sudden maneuver threw Sylvia off balance, and she fell against my thigh. He. Grabbing my leg for support, Sylvia tried to push herself upright, only for me to shove her head down. Lieutenant Daniel, what the hell? Tat. Gunfire erupted from all directions, bullets whizzing past and slamming into the Jeep. One round hit the passenger window with a sharp crack. If it weren't for the reinforced glass, it would have shattered instantly. Finally understanding the situation, Sylvia stopped trying to raise her head and ducked lower. No way. Unfortunately, it was exactly what she thought. Spike traps and gunfire meant only one thing: an ambush. Chapter 12. I gritted my teeth and floored the accelerator. Stopping meant death. That was the only thought racing through my head. Forcing my ragged breathing under control, I grabbed the radio while keeping my eyes on the road. This is Kingfisher. Enemy ambush. I repeat, enemy ambush. Approximately 42 kilometers toward Mavrashka village. Request immediate support. Finishing my call, I quickly switched frequencies and addressed my platoon. This is the lieutenant. Respond. Damn it, say something, anything. After a brief pause, a trembling voice came through. Lieutenant, we don't know what's happening. We've veered off onto a side path to avoid the gunfire, but we're in the opposite direction from you. It was Frane's voice. I'd have preferred someone calmer on standby, but this wasn't the time to be picky. Fine, keep driving until you've put enough distance between yourselves and the enemy. Then dismount, spread out, and assess their numbers while waiting for reinforcements, if you determine they can be suppressed. Boom! A violent jolt shook the vehicle, and the impact knocked the radio out of my hands. Sylvia groaned beside me as the world spun in my vision. Gripping the steering wheel desperately, I swore under my breath. The tire's out. Whether it was deliberate or a stray bullet, it doesn't matter now. The important thing was that the gunfire had started fatting. I'd managed to put some distance between us and the enemy, buying a bit of time. But I couldn't let my guard down yet. I needed to get out of their sight. A sharp curve appeared ahead. I lifted my foot off the accelerator and slammed the brakes. Screech! The tires screamed as the Jeep skidded, and I wrenched the wheel hard. The vehicle spun halfway and tilted precariously to the side. Before it could roll over, I stomped the accelerator. The tires dug in and lurched forward, stabilizing the Jeep back onto all four wheels. Thunk! Sylvia's sharp scream pierced the air. It was the kind of cry that made me feel guilty, but now wasn't the time to care. Shifting gears, I pressed the accelerator again. The Jeep roared as it sped up, and for a moment I marveled at how fast it could actually move. Until the world tilted again. Damn it! The damaged tire finally gave out, hissing as it bled air and failed completely. Panicking, I slammed the brakes, but it only made things worse. The tires screeched as the vehicle skidded, spinning wildly. Then crash. A deafening impact slammed through the frame, rattling my bones. Buffy. Shaking off the pain, I slowly lifted my head and saw the hood buried into a tree trunk. Smoke began seeping out. Uffy. A faint groan came from my leg. Looking down, I saw Sylvia sprawled against my thigh. Concerned, at least outwardly, I asked, "Are you all right?" Of course she wasn't, but it felt polite to ask. Sylvia glared at me briefly before pushing herself upright. "I'm not all right, but I can move. More importantly, how did they know where we'd be?" I hadn't expected that. I thought she'd be crying or panicking. Then again, this was the future empress who'd one day command the Empire's strongest army. A title like Ironblood wouldn't fit someone who broke down in moments like this. There must have been a spy in the forward base feeding them information. It's common in wartime. I reached for the door handle, but it didn't budge. The impact had bent the frame. After a few kicks with my boot, the door finally gave way and fell off with a thud. Stepping out, I extended my hand to Sylvia. "Get out. We need to put more distance between us and them before they catch up." "Right, that sounds reasonable." Sylvia nodded and grabbed my hand, stepping out of the Jeep. As she took a deep breath, I noticed her shoulders trembling slightly. So she was scared after all. Suppressing a chuckle, I guided her toward the forest. Catching my amusement, Sylvia blushed faintly. "You're a reckless driver, Lieutenant Daniel." Trying to change the subject, huh? She might act tough, but she was still just a teenager. Thank you for the compliment. Do you think that was a compliment? If I hadn't driven recklessly, we'd be full of bullet holes by now. If that's not worth praise, what is? We wouldn't have been shot, I have. Sylvia trailed off, closing her mouth. Good, trying to outtalk someone with more experience was a losing battle. Lieutenant Daniel, what do we? I covered her mouth with my hand. Voices were approaching. Sylvia flailed briefly, but I gestured for her to stay quiet. Realizing the situation, she nodded. I led her behind some bushes, listening carefully. They must be nearby. Their jeep wrecked, they couldn't have gone far. Damn it, I told you to hide the spike strips better. Shut up, Beldam, complaining won't fix anything. Peeking through the leaves, I counted 6 of them. A single squad, no others in sight. But they were closing in fast. If this kept up, we'd be spotted soon. Wait a minute. They're Allied soldiers, aren't they? If I surrendered and requested asylum, they might accept. I wasn't just some random grunt. I was an officer from the Imperial General Staff. Any halfwit could see my strategic value. If they have a spy feeding them intel, they probably have a way to smuggle me out too. I hadn't expected to escape the Empire like this, but it was as good an opportunity as any. Miss Reporter. Of course, I couldn't surrender with Sylvia around. She'd kill me before I even made it to the Allied camp. We're going to be discovered soon. One of us needs to be the bait and lead them away so the other can escape. I'll do it. Sylvia's eyes widened. No, stop that nonsense, you'll die. If my death lets you survive, that's enough. Soldiers exist to protect civilians. Lieutenant Daniel. Grasping her shoulders gently, I softened my voice. Please survive. If peace ever returns to the Empire, I hope you'll remember that I existed. Sylvia's face flushed as if she was moved. With my farewell speech done, I let go of her shoulders and stood up. Wait, you don't have to. Sylvia tried to stop me, but it was too late. I sprinted in the opposite direction, away from where she was hiding. Hey, over there. Get him. Hearing the soldiers shouting as they chased after me, I smirked. Perfect. Everything was going according to plan. At this rate, escaping the Empire was just a matter of time. Left alone, Sylvia stared blankly in the direction where Daniel had run. His words echoed repeatedly in her mind. If my death ensures your survival, that's enough for me. Soldiers exist to protect their people. The image of Daniel, his eyes steeped in sorrow as he willingly faced death, was etched vividly in her thoughts. To Sylvia, it was an utterly surreal sight. What kind of officer would sacrifice his life for a mere war correspondent? Captain Hines was wrong. No respect for others, that was utter nonsense. Daniel Steiner was someone willing to give his life for the people of the Empire. He wasn't like the bureaucrats in the imperial court, who only paid lip service to sacrifice and devotion. Daniel had demonstrated his selflessness not through words, but through actions. She had to save him, she needed to have him. The Empire could not afford to lose such a treasure in a worthless place like this. Royal Guards. The moment Sylvia uttered those words, the air around her distorted. Soldiers wearing gas masks emerged one by one, deactivating their optical camouflage. They had been secretly guarding Sylvia, revealing themselves only when the signal was given. Without so much as glancing at them, Sylvia spoke in a cold voice. Rescue Lieutenant Daniel Steiner, if so much as a single scratch appears on him. Her sharp eyes narrowed dangerously. I won't forgive any of you. The Royal Guards responded with a brief nod before launching into rapid motion, vanishing into the forest in pursuit of Daniel. Watching her elite guards disappear, Sylvia slowly rose to her feet. She pressed a hand to her chest and exhaled softly. Whether it was the aftermath of the chaotic drive or lingering tension, her heart still pounded harder than usual. Chapter 13. After running and running for what felt like an eternity, I finally arrived at a clearing in the forest. Leaving footprints in the pristine white ground, I stepped into the center of the clearing and bent over, resting my hands on my knees. Heated breaths poured out of my mouth in rapid succession. I feel like I'm going to throw up. Sprinting at full speed for several minutes left my head spinning. I didn't particularly enjoy running like this, but I had no other choice. Putting as much distance as possible between myself and Sylvia was the top priority. If the princess hears about my attempt to defect, I'm screwed. The princess's nature demanded that traitors be dealt with, no matter the cost. Therefore, disappearing like a ghost before she found out was my best option. How far do you think you're going to run, you son of a... Huff. As I struggled to catch my breath, I heard the voice of an allied soldier. When I turned around calmly, I saw the 6 soldiers from earlier approaching, panting heavily. The fact that they weren't pointing their guns at me suggested they were open to talking. I didn't want to fight either, so I raised my hands, still breathing heavily. Let's all calm down and have a conversation first. I'm Daniel Steiner, First Lieutenant and Acting Operations Officer in the Imperial General Staff. State your affiliation and names. Good, I introduced myself while naturally emphasizing my position and rank. If they weren't complete idiots, they'd realize I was someone with strategic value. Do you think we don't know who you are? Strangely, though, the soldiers just frowned, looking annoyed rather than surprised. Enough talk. Where's the princess? Depending on your answer, we might let you live, so think carefully. Princess. Hearing the word princess from an allied soldier's mouth momentarily froze my thoughts. How did they know the person traveling with me was the princess? Sylvia wasn't an idiot. She wouldn't have gone around broadcasting her identity while disguised as a war correspondent. Only a select few knew she had come to the Northern Front. And those few were people Sylvia deemed trustworthy. Given Sylvia's meticulous nature when selecting personnel, it was unlikely any of them were spies. Then who leaked the information to set up this ambush? Turning it over in my head, I reached a grim realization and let out a low growl. The prince. Everything made sense if it was family. He would have had the closest view of Sylvia's every move. In fact, Ludwig von Amberg, the crown prince, had reportedly clashed with his younger sister Sylvia multiple times over the line of succession. Apparently, their conflict hadn't just been for show. Trying to assassinate his own sister, that bastard's completely insane. I clicked my tongue and lowered my hands. Now that I knew the truth, there was no need to surrender. The soldiers in front of me weren't from the allied nations. They were assassins sent by the crown prince, disguised to make it look like Sylvia had been attacked by the allies. Realizing this was all a staged act chilled my blood. Did the crown prince send you? My question made the soldiers flinch. That reaction solidified my suspicion. Now that I look closer, your allied uniforms are awfully clean. What are you getting at? In guerrilla warfare, veterans are typically deployed for ambush operations. Sending rookies would drastically reduce the odds of success, but your uniforms look brand new, just like fresh recruits. Does that make sense to you? If they wanted to sell the disguise, they should have dirtied up their uniforms to match seasoned soldiers. The soldiers failed to counter my observation, instead letting out hollow laughs. One of them, who seemed to be the squad leader, stepped forward. You figured it out right away, huh? Guess you really are the elite they say you are. Then you must know the situation. Join us and we'll guarantee your rise to power. Us, you mean the crown prince? Watch your tone, it's His Highness the Crown Prince. Seeing the soldier growl in anger, I couldn't help but laugh. The soldier frowned at my reaction. "What's so funny?" "It's just, watching you cling to a sinking ship is kind of pitiful. The crown prince, he's not fit to be emperor. That position belongs to the princess, not that incompetent fool." I meant it as genuine advice, knowing how the future would unfold. But judging by the soldiers' expressions, they didn't appreciate it. They gripped their guns tightly, their faces twisted in irritation. "Thanks for being honest. Now we don't need to talk any." It was time to move. Before the soldier could finish, I drew my revolver from its holster. At the same time, I focused mana into my central nervous system, accelerating my reflexes. Instantly, my vision expanded, and my pupils constricted. The world around me seemed to slow down. The soldier in front of me began raising his gun. Another opened his mouth, likely to curse. A few others rushed toward me, their movements sluggish in my heightened perception. Taking a deep breath, I raised my revolver, aimed at their heads, and pulled the trigger. The gunpowder exploded, and the bullets seemed to float unrealistically, as if drifting through zero gravity. But the bullets advanced steadily toward the soldiers' heads. The moment I moved my revolver's barrel to finish off the last soldier, my neural acceleration wore off, and the world returned to its normal speed. Bang! 5 gunshots rang out almost simultaneously, blowing the soldiers' heads apart in succession. Without so much as a scream, their bodies crumpled to the ground. But one remained. As my neural acceleration faded, the last soldier was still charging toward me. "You bastard!" I tried to aim, but my hands trembled violently. The recoil from using neural acceleration had taken a heavy toll on my body. This ability was the very thing that had allowed me to graduate at the top of my class at the academy, but its downside was clear. The physical strain afterward was severe. If not for the mana cylinder, I wouldn't have been able to take down all 5 soldiers simultaneously. Without it, the neural acceleration would have cut out halfway, leaving me dead. That's how extreme the mana consumption was. Damn it! My head throbbed, and my limbs felt like they were sinking into quicksand, refusing to obey. But if I didn't kill him, I'd be the one to die. Focusing my mind with difficulty, I pulled the trigger. Bang! The gunshot echoed high into the air, and the soldier's arm exploded. I missed my aim. Even with his arm blown off, the soldier screamed and kept charging at me. He threw his weight forward and slammed into me. He. I fell backward, my body sinking into the snow. The soldier climbed on top of me and drew a military knife, raising it high to drive it into my head. Sensing the danger, I instinctively grabbed his wrist. "You son of a bitch, you demon bastard, die." The soldier spat curses, his saliva flying everywhere. But I didn't have the energy to respond. All I could do was use both hands to grip his wrist and push back. Grrr. It wasn't working. I couldn't muster the strength. I could see the knife's tip inching closer to my eye, and I couldn't stop it. Fear trickled down my spine. What the hell, am I going to die like this? They said people saw their lives flash before their eyes before death. All I felt was emptiness. I wanted to deny my death, but the strength in my hands was fading fast. And then, bang! With a gunshot, the side of the soldier's head exploded. His body slumped forward, falling heavily onto me. I quickly grabbed the knife and drove it deep into his neck, just to make sure. Then I shoved his body aside and slowly sat up. After steadying my ragged breath, I turned to the side and saw a group wearing Imperial uniforms and gas masks. The Imperial Central Army, no, the Royal Guard. If it was the Royal Guard, I had a pretty good idea who had sent them. Sure enough, Selvia appeared from behind them, arriving a moment later. Seeing the worry etched on her face, I felt a pang of guilt, as if I'd done something wrong. Unaware of my thoughts, Sylvia knelt beside me as soon as she reached me. "Are you okay? You're not hurt anywhere, right?" I nodded. "I'm not injured, thanks to the royal guard, so—" I trailed off, and Sylvia lowered her gaze as if she'd realized what I was about to say. "I'm sorry. I never meant to deceive you. I only disguised myself as a war correspondent because I thought I wouldn't be able to see what kind of person you really were as a royal. I already knew. But for now, I decided to pretend I didn't. So did you learn a lot about me?" I said it to lighten the mood. "Of course." But Sylvia took my words seriously. "First, during the planning phase of the operation, you opposed Captain Heinz's opinion and established new logic. The fact that it was justified shows you have both the integrity to stand up to authority and the insight to read the battlefield. I only said that because I wanted to get dishonorably discharged. And at Edelcrawl Gorge, you instantly recognized Colonel Jeremy, who was disguised as a soldier. Otherwise, it wouldn't make sense for you to take him out with the first shot." "Yeah, it doesn't make sense. I just shot a soldier and later found out it was him." "Finally, you have the selflessness to sacrifice yourself for the people of the Empire. You risked your life to save what you thought was just a war correspondent. I was just looking for a chance to defect and improvised a cover story to escape." None of what she said was true, but with Sylvia looking at me so earnestly, I couldn't bring myself to deny it. Telling the truth would mean my execution. "Lieutenant Daniel Steiner." Sylvia took my hand and solemnly declared, "On behalf of the imperial family, I declare that you are the Empire's greatest treasure." I felt like I was going to die of suffocation. Chapter 14. After reuniting with Princess Sylvia, the tide of battle shifted dramatically. Following Daniel's orders, the platoon disembarked and scattered to join reinforcements dispatched by the Special Operations Unit. Together, they obliterated the Crown Prince's forces, who had been disguised as Allied soldiers. On top of that, Captain Heinz had requested additional support, prompting nearby air squadrons to send reconnaissance helicopters and fighter jets into the fray. Against such overwhelming force, the Crown Prince's troops never stood a chance. To begin with, they were a small unit deployed for a swift and decisive operation. Even the Special Operations reinforcements alone were enough to overwhelm them. With the addition of air support, their defeat was inevitable. Cornered, the Crown Prince's soldiers chose to end their lives en masse, bringing the situation to a close. And now, Daniel and his platoon stood in formation in the forest clearing, maintaining a parade rest stance. In front of the transport helicopter that had landed at the clearing center, Sylvia blinked her blue eyes as she looked at them. So it's true, exceptional soldiers follow an exceptional commander. Daniel and his men were all covered in blood. It meant they hadn't hesitated to fight against the Crown Prince's troops. Of course, aside from Daniel, none of them realized that the enemies they had fought were under the Crown Prince's command. "Lieutenant Daniel." Sylvia, after surveying the platoon, met Daniel's eyes. She gestured for him to come closer, and Daniel stepped forward without hesitation. "You called for me." Sylvia nodded and leaned in, rising onto her toes to whisper in his ear. "Keep what you saw and heard today to yourself. No one must know that my brother was involved in this incident." Understood. With no evidence, openly accusing the Crown Prince could easily backfire. "As expected, it's so easy to communicate with you." Her voice, murmured so close to his ear, was sweet. Then Sylvia took a step back. "Well then, I'll return to the capital now. Honestly, I'd love to travel to the General Staff with you and talk more, but this matter has gotten too big. I need to hurry back." It had indeed escalated. By now, News of the princess's ambush had likely spread throughout the military leadership in the capital. That was thanks to Captain Hines, who had judged the situation critical enough to call for air support. If Selvia didn't return quickly, she would face not only the emperor's scrutiny, but also the sharp eyes of the nobles in court. Understanding her position, Daniel bowed his head. "It has been an honor to meet you. I look forward to the day I can serve you again." Selvia gave a faint smile at Daniel's formal words. "I'm sure we'll meet again soon." It was a loaded remark. Before Daniel could respond, Selvia turned and boarded the transport helicopter. Once she was inside, the royal guard followed with disciplined movements and closed the doors. One of the guards confirmed that everyone was aboard, and the pilot began preparations for takeoff. The helicopter's rotors spun faster and faster, generating a loud roar as they pushed against the air. No, the ground. It felt more accurate to say they pushed against the ground. Snow scattered in all directions as the helicopter lifted off, heading straight for the capital. Inside the helicopter, Selvia sat by the window, looking down at the ground. She could see Daniel and his platoon saluting the helicopter as it rose. After gazing at them in silence, Selvia turned her head and looked at one of the royal guards checking his weapon. On the guard's shoulder was the golden wing emblem, symbolizing his status as the chief bodyguard of the royal guard. Lieutenant Colonel Hartmann Edelstein. He was the field commander of the royal guard and a renowned killing machine. One of the most infamous stories about Hartmann involved him charging into a battlefield drenched in bullets, cutting down enemies with nothing but a sword. Yet there was one person this killing machine feared, and that was Selvia von Amberg, who was now staring at him with an impassive expression. Most of the time, Hartmann found Selvia adorable and beautiful, like a granddaughter. But when she looked at him like this, silent and focused, it sent chills down his spine because he had no idea what she was thinking. Of course, he couldn't ignore her forever. Reluctantly, Hartmann set aside his weapon and removed his gas mask. A bead of cold sweat rolled down the wrinkled face of the veteran soldier. "Your Highness, do you have something to say to me?" "I do. Why didn't you rescue Lieutenant Daniel immediately?" "What do you mean?" "Do you think I'm an idiot, Hartmann? It's obvious you arrived before Daniel engaged the enemy, so why didn't you step in right away? Explain yourself." As I suspected, her instincts were razor-sharp. Hartmann glanced around, wondering how to explain himself. He sent what was essentially an SOS signal, but the royal guards around him kept their heads down, focusing intently on cleaning their weapons. They were pretending not to notice, hopping to avoid any collateral damage. "Damn cowards." Hartmann shot a sharp glare at his subordinates before turning back to Selvia and forcing a warm smile. "As far as I understand, Your Highness's order was to ensure that Lieutenant Daniel Steiner was rescued without injury. The lieutenant remained unharmed, so I believe we faithfully carried out your command. Are you seriously trying to justify yourself right now?" "Your Highness, I understand your anger, but we needed time to assess the character and abilities of the man you intend to favor. That, too, is part of our duty." While Hartmann didn't doubt Selvia's judgment, it was crucial for the royal guard to evaluate the skills and ideology of anyone who got close to the princess. If I may add a bit more in my defense, we did gain valuable information. Lieutenant Daniel Steiner possessed the rare ability to accelerate his nervous system. Although the technique had fallen out of favor due to its severe mana consumption and limited duration, modern warfare had changed its value. In the past, mere seconds of acceleration weren't enough to pierce a knight's armor or shatter a mage's barrier. But with the advancement of technology and firearms, the time it took to kill someone had been reduced to fractions of a second. On the modern battlefield, Even the lowest of soldiers could kill someone of noble blood if they could aim properly. Being able to carve out even a few seconds of personal time in such an environment was a tremendous advantage. In that regard, Lieutenant Daniel Steiner was a highly desirable asset. If he hadn't been part of the general staff, Hartman might have already offered him a position in the Royal Guard. Lieutenant Daniel Steiner's combat skills are exceptional. With just a bit more luck, he could have taken down all 6 enemies on his own. Sylvia half-narrowed her eyes with a disgruntled expression. Having served her for a long time, Hartman immediately understood what that look meant. It was the unspoken equivalent of, "That's not what I asked, is it?" If he gave the wrong answer here, he might lose her favor. And for Hartman, losing Sylvia's favor would be painful. Despite their stark difference in status, Hartman genuinely cherished Sylvia like a granddaughter. So he needed to give her something more, something useful. Clearing his throat, Hartman spoke in a more serious tone. "If Your Highness truly intends to recruit Lieutenant Daniel Steiner as an ally, I don't believe you'll need to test his loyalty." Sylvia blinked in confusion at the sudden shift. Hartman continued. "During the confrontation, Lieutenant Daniel Steiner declared in front of the Crown Prince's soldiers that the incompetent prince will never become emperor. He also stated, 'The one who will become emperor is the princess.'" Sylvia's eyes widened. Having arrived late to the scene, she hadn't heard Daniel's words herself. "Are you certain he really said that?" "Yes, everyone here heard it." The royal guards cleaning their weapons nodded in unison. Seeing that, a faint smile formed on Sylvia's lips. "I see, so that's what Lieutenant Daniel said." Trailing off, Sylvia turned her gaze to the window, looking down at the ground. Even though the clearing was now far behind them, her eyes instinctively searched for Daniel. To think he said something like that. She didn't know why, but it seemed Daniel's words had struck a chord with her. Is she pleased about recruiting new talent? Hartman found it odd, though. She seemed more excited than usual. Wait, could she be seeing Lieutenant Daniel as a potential romantic interest? No, that couldn't be it. After enduring endless schemes from her brother, Sylvia had treated the opposite sex with complete indifference, as if they were nothing more than rocks. Whatever the reason, Hartman found it refreshing to see Sylvia display an expression more fitting for her age. Chapter 15. After parting ways with the princess, my platoon and I quickly cleaned ourselves up and waited for further orders. As much as I wanted to get out of this god-forsaken northern front as soon as possible, wrecking a jeep had come with its own set of bureaucratic hurdles to secure a replacement. Eventually, I received a new vehicle from the Special Operations Company and immediately set out for the General Staff Headquarters. Just like before, it took 4 days of non-stop driving to arrive at the grand entrance, marked by an ornate fountain. Feeling the weariness of the journey, I opened the passenger door and stepped out, spotting my platoon members disembarking from their transport vehicles nearby. Despite a few soldiers sporting bandages from injuries sustained during the ambush, they stood in neat squads before me, grinning as if they had already forgotten their wounds. I suppose they're just relieved there's no need to worry about ambushes here. I can't blame them. If I were in their shoes, I'd probably be wearing the same expression. I took a moment to let my gaze sweep over each soldier before speaking. You all did well. Each of you fulfilled your duties admirably on the Northern Front, and even when faced with an unexpected ambush, you responded with composure. That deserves praise. You worked hard too, sir. I only wish we could have fought more. We should have blown off more of those bastards' balls. The loud remarks from a couple of overly enthusiastic soldiers drew laughter from the rest of the platoon. Normally, I would have given them a warning, but this wasn't the time for that. We just returned victorious, and I didn't want to spoil the atmosphere. There'll be plenty of opportunities to blow off the Allies' balls in the future, so don't worry. As for the rest of you, forget the speeches. Dismissed. Go enjoy your victory." The soldiers saluted sharply as I finished speaking. After returning the salute, I turned toward the headquarters building, only to pause when Freen approached me hesitantly, looking like she had something to say. "What is it?" My voice came out lower than I intended, probably from exhaustion, which caused Freen to flinch before gathering her courage. "Lieutenant Daniel Steiner, I wanted to discuss my future." Oh, you'll be assigned to the headquarters Direct Command Battalion. Unless otherwise summoned, stay there and continue training." "That's not what I meant." "Then what was it?" I stared at her silently, too tired to prod, and Freen took a deep breath before looking up at me. I want to become an officer like you." "An officer?" "Yes. After fighting on the Northern Front, I feel strongly about serving the Empire, just like you." It was a bit sudden, but Freen becoming an officer was inevitable. She was destined for it anyway, though this felt earlier than expected. Normally, she would have spent more time as a private before deciding to pursue a commission. I didn't know what had prompted her change of heart, but there was no reason to refuse her. "I'll let Command know you want to become an officer. Given your role in saving Her Highness during the ambush, your promotion should go through without much trouble." Freen's eyes widened in surprise, as if she hadn't expected me to approve so easily. Then she saluted me sharply. Thank you so much, Lieutenant." I wasn't sure it warranted that level of gratitude, but it didn't feel bad either. I nodded vaguely before heading into the headquarters building. And the moment I stepped into the operations office, I was hit with the overwhelming urge to run away. "Lieutenant Daniel, or should I say Captain now, we've been waiting for you, all of us." Ernst, the head of operations, welcomed me enthusiastically as the rest of the staff burst into cheers. Looking around, I saw everyone standing and clapping. The worst part was the ridiculous decorations covering my desk, flowers, balloons, and even a new nameplate in the center. Operations Officer / Captain Daniel Steiner. The nameplate looked noticeably fancier than before. Before I could ask what the hell was going on, Ernst gestured to one of the soldiers nearby. The soldier approached with a small box in both hands and presented it to me. The box was all too familiar. It looked just like the one Captain Philip had given me before. "Congratulations on your promotion, Captain Daniel Steiner." So that's what this was. Opening the box, I saw a captain's badge and shoulder boards neatly arranged inside. I stared at them with a grimace, but Ernst simply smiled in satisfaction. "I told you to go out there and make a name for yourself, but I didn't expect you to pull it off so brilliantly. You even risked your life for the princess. The higher-ups won't dare question your abilities anymore." This was the first time I'd ever seen Ernst smile so brightly. Well, it made sense. My accomplishments reflected positively on him as well. Meanwhile, I let out an internal sigh, realizing my dream of early retirement had just slipped even further away. But with so many eyes on me, I couldn't show my true feelings. "You flatter me. I only did what any soldier of the Empire would have done." So I forced a smile and shook Ernst's hand, the best I could do under the circumstances. The week following my promotion was a blur of activity. Most of it revolved around navigating social interactions. Having been promoted twice in quick succession, I had become something of a celebrity within the General Staff headquarters, and with celebrity status came an endless stream of invitations. The offers were always framed as casual meals or drinks, but the ulterior motives were transparent. It was obvious that they wanted to recruit me to strengthen their military factions, which were deeply tied to political power struggles. With that in mind, I made a conscious effort to dodge all invitations, citing my busy schedule as an excuse. Interestingly, Ernst, my direct superior, seemed to find my evasive attitude rather pleasing. He even cornered me outside the officers' mess hall to regale me with yet another family anecdote. So, do you know what my daughter said to me the other day? She told me she'd go and take care of those allied bastards herself so I wouldn't have to go to work the next day. Isn't that adorable? Ernst was notoriously all business. He had no reputation for small talk. Yet, for some reason, he never hesitated to share personal stories with me. It was a clear sign that he liked me. And frankly, it made me uncomfortable. A superior's favor could be as burdensome as it was beneficial, especially when it extended beyond professional matters. I was just beginning to think of a polite way to cut the conversation short when, "Daniel Steiner, you damn devil of a bastard." The sudden shout from behind me made my shoulders jolt. Turning around, I found myself face to face with an Allied officer in uniform, bound in restraints, glaring daggers at me. "You piece of shit, you filthy, cowardly son of a—" The officer lunged forward, only to be kicked in the back of the knee by a soldier escorting him. Thus the Allied officer collapsed face first onto the ground. The soldier who had kicked him looked flustered and quickly bowed his head to me. I raised a hand to signal that it was fine, and the soldier promptly dragged the officer to his feet while barking orders at him. Watching the scene, I finally spoke up, puzzled. "Who is he?" "Oh, right. The Northern Front reported that they were transferring a high-ranking prisoner to headquarters today. Looks like that's him. You should recognize him. You captured him yourself." I nodded in understanding. This was the same officer who had surrendered after I took the first shot during the operation to eliminate Colonel Jeremy. I think he was a major. While I was lost in thought, Ernst clicked his tongue and continued. "I hear they're trying to treat him well since he's an officer, but it's been difficult. Apparently, he worked in Allied intelligence, so he'd be quite the catch if we could turn him." "Interesting." I watched the Allied officer being dragged away and suddenly had an idea. "Chief, what is it? Would it be possible for me to handle his interrogation?" Ernst blinked in surprise before tilting his head. "It's not impossible, but you'd be adding even more work to your plate." "I don't mind. I think it'll be worth it." Ernst let out a low whistle. "What an exemplary patriot. Honestly, it's humbling." He nodded his approval, clearly moved by my supposed dedication. But in reality, my thoughts were anything but patriotic. This might just be it. I couldn't help but smirk to myself. I might finally have found a way to escape the Empire, without resorting to a dishonorable discharge. Chapter 16. With interrogation clearance secured through Ernst, Daniel headed to the nearby military police station after work. Upon presenting his clearance to the administrative staff and stepping into the interrogation room, he was greeted by a startled officer. Captain Daniel Steiner, sir. I've been expecting you." Sergeant Wendelin, the interrogator, hastily stubbed out his cigarette and saluted. Though his posture was slightly stiff, his entire body seemed frozen with tension, prompting Daniel to tilt his head in mild confusion. "Why are you so nervous?" For Wendelin, nervousness was inevitable. Who was Daniel Steiner, after all? A monster who had earned 2 consecutive promotions within 6 months of his commission. In the general staff, such rapid promotions practically guaranteed advancement to field officer ranks. Naturally, as a mere sergeant, Wendelin felt compelled to show the utmost respect to this future high-ranking officer. However, from Daniel's perspective, the sergeant's rigid demeanor seemed excessive, almost like watching a recruit in training camp. Daniel clicked his tongue and gestured dismissively. "At ease, Sergeant." Yes, sir. Wendelin snapped to attention, then stepped aside with crisp precision. It was his way of silently yielding his position as the interrogator now, that Daniel had entered with proper clearance. Daniel cast a brief glance at the overly formal sergeant before turning to the one-way glass that separated the observation room from the interrogation chamber. Inside, sitting at a table with his wrists cuffed, was the prisoner, Reginald Harrington. The man's disheveled appearance and worn-out glasses gave him a haggard look, but Daniel knew better than to underestimate him. Reginald was an elite officer from the Allied nations, formerly assigned to their intelligence division during his junior officer years. Which means he likely had knowledge of contact points and operatives within the Empire. Daniel's plan was straightforward. Build rapport with Reginald to break down barriers of distrust. Once trust was established, hint at his desire to defect to the Allied nations. Use Reginald's network to establish escape routes and contacts within the Empire. Escape to the Allied nations with Reginald, earning a cushy position and living a comfortable life. It was, in every sense, the perfect plan. With confidence, Daniel nodded to himself and turned to Wendelin. Sergeant Wendelin, any progress so far? Sir, oh no, sir. The man's tight-lipped. Won't say a word no matter how we try, whether through persuasion or threats. I see. Mind if I give it a try? Wendelin immediately nodded. Of course, sir, you have clearance. I'll open the door for you. Wendelin retrieved a key from his belt and unlocked the steel door to the interrogation room. After nodding his thanks, Daniel stepped inside. As soon as Wendelin shut the door behind him, Reginald slowly raised his head at the sound. Upon recognizing Daniel, his eyes widened in rage. You bastard! Clank! Reginald strained against his cuffs, nearly lifting himself out of his chair. But Daniel remained calm, raising a single finger to his lips in a silencing gesture. He dragged out a chair and sat down across from Reginald. Mindful of Wendelin watching from the other side of the glass, Daniel pulled out a file from his briefcase. The folder contained Reginald's profile, courtesy of the Empire's Intelligence Department. Name, Reginald Harrington. Rank, Major. Battalion Commander of the 107th Assault Battalion of the Allied Liberation Front. Origin, Eldresia Kingdom, specifically the southern province of Vimbaril. Am I correct? Reginald glared at Daniel without answering. Unbothered, Daniel shrugged and extended his hand toward the file. Fine, in that case, I'll proceed with my own method. Daniel emphasized my own method deliberately, then reached over to turn off the microphone installed on the table. It was against protocol to disable the mic during an interrogation, but his earlier statement should keep Wendelin from barging in to protest. There, the mic's off. No one outside can eavesdrop on this conversation now, so how about we have a more relaxed chat? Relaxed, Reginald scoffed. You expect me to relax while I'm cuffed? Is this some kind of imperial joke? As expected, opening with friendliness hadn't worked. It was time to switch tactics. Reginald, I hear the Northern Front offered you several generous deals, yet you rejected them all. That must mean you're still determined to return to the Allied nations. You're stating the obvious. Good, in that case, I might be able to help you. Reginald's eyes narrowed. Daniel leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. If you cooperate, I can make arrangements that might just let you see your wife and daughter back home. Sweat formed on Reginald's forehead. Daniel had meant his words as an offer to collaborate, but to Reginald, it sounded like a threat against his family. Reginald took a shaky breath before speaking in a trembling voice. Do you know where my family is? Daniel nodded. Of course, I know where they live, what they do, and even the name of their dog. Archie, right? A golden retriever. As Daniel casually listed off the details obtained from Imperial intelligence, Reginald's eyes widened in shock. How do you know all that? There's no need to be surprised. Just like the Allied nations gather intelligence on the Empire, we do the same to you. Suddenly recalling another tidbit, Daniel added smoothly. Oh, and one more thing. Your eldest daughter, Sophia, recently started taking piano lessons, didn't she? Her dream is to become a pianist, isn't it? Daniel, having learned from Ernst, figured that talking about family was a good way to establish rapport. It's working. Daniel could see that Reginald's anger was starting to subside as he listened intently. Wanting to reinforce the sense of connection, Daniel smiled faintly and said, I hear you're a devoted father. I wish I'd had a father like that. I'm an orphan, you see. I know all too well how hard it is to grow up without a father. A bead of sweat rolled down Reginald's temple. To Daniel, it was just a passing remark meant to build camaraderie. But to Reginald, it sounded like, do you want your daughters to grow up without a father? And the fact that Daniel said it with such a calm smile made it even more terrifying. I. Reginald stammered before raising his trembling hand to wipe his forehead. After taking a moment to steady his breathing, he swallowed hard and said, Give me some time to think about it, please. What already? Daniel blinked in mild surprise. He had hoped to build more rapport before getting to this point. Still, Reginald was going to be here for the foreseeable future. There would be plenty of opportunities to talk again. Deciding to give him some space, Daniel stood up. All right, we'll talk again later. Is there anything you'd like to eat in the meantime? Reginald shook his head. Shrugging, Daniel turned and walked toward the door. Outside, Wendelin was already unlocking the door. Before stepping out, Daniel turned back to Reginald as if he had just remembered something. Oh, by the way, Major Reginald, your daughters look a lot like your wife. They're very beautiful. Daniel had meant it as a compliment, but Reginald's face drained of color. What is he planning to do to my daughters? Overwhelmed by dread, Reginald felt his heart pounding out of control. But completely unaware of Reginald's terror, Daniel simply waved with a smile. See you next time. I hope you'll be more cooperative then. Before Reginald could respond, the steel door closed. Left alone, Reginald began hyperventilating, his entire body trembling. A demon. Tears welled up in his eyes as he silently screamed in despair. That man is the devil sent straight from hell. The next day, while having lunch with Ernst in the officers' mess hall, I paused mid-bite. Wendelin had entered the hall, glancing around as if searching for someone, before walking straight toward me. Setting down my utensils, I watched as he saluted sharply. Thank you so much, Captain Daniel Steiner. I stared at him, speechless. Ernst, too, looked puzzled, staring intently at Wendelin. Sensing the attention, Wendelin lowered his hand and explained. After your interrogation yesterday, Reginald Harrington agreed to cooperate with the Empire. He said he'd share all the information he knows. Oh, is that true? Ernst's face lit up, but I felt my mind go blank. What? I was sure things had been going well yesterday. I couldn't make sense of it at all. Chapter 17. Ernst looked at me with an incredulous expression. His eyes, brimming with expectation, seemed to say, my capable subordinate has done it again, a thought that doubled the pressure weighing on me. How exactly did you get that tight-lipped man to talk? Share your secret. Our interrogators could use some pointers. At Ernst's words, Sergeant Bendelin also turned to me with a smile. I could understand their curiosity. Since I had muted the microphone during yesterday's interrogation, no one knew what had transpired. Naturally, the interrogators would want to know how I had managed to persuade a stubborn prisoner to cooperate. but no matter how much I thought about it, all I had done was hold a casual conversation with Reginald. I didn't have any special interrogation techniques, so their questions only left me more flustered. While I struggled to come up with an answer, Bendelin spoke up in an upbeat voice, likely trying to lighten the mood. I've worked as an interrogator for years, but I've never seen anyone wrap up an interrogation as quickly as Captain Daniel Steiner. Oh, is that so? It's true. After the captain left the room, that bastard Reginald was practically begging to cooperate with the Empire in a shaky voice. It was so satisfying. He was about to cry, that stiff-necked Reginald. Usually, interrogations involve shouting or physical intimidation, but Captain Daniel just kept smiling and speaking calmly the entire time. It was downright dignified. Bendelin, he's a good man, but his flattery is a bit much. It seemed exaggerated to the point where I wanted to put a stop to it, but Ernst looked as though he believed every word. In fact, he was now staring at me with even greater expectations than before. Hearing the sergeant's account only makes me more curious. What exactly did you talk about with Reginald? He asked twice. Ignoring a superior officer's question twice would be insubordination. I guess I had no choice. After hesitating briefly, I answered. It wasn't much. I just talked about his family a few times. At the mention of family, both Bendelin and Ernst flinched. Even some of the officers who had been eavesdropping turned to glance in my direction. An inexplicable silence fell over the room. Just as I was starting to wonder what was going on, Ernst cleared his throat and nodded. That is indeed one of the most effective methods. Did you hear that, Sergeant? You should take notes from Captain Daniel. Oh, absolutely. I can't believe I've been too lenient with prisoners until now. It seemed like they were misunderstanding something. It felt strange, but I decided against clarifying. From experience, trying to explain myself in these situations usually only made the misunderstanding worse. So instead, I simply gave a slight nod, and Bendelin saluted me energetically. For some reason, his salute seemed more rigid than when I first met him. Well then, I'll be returning to the military police unit. Enjoy your meal, sir. Take care, and good work making the trip to General Staff Headquarters. Bendelin snapped to attention, turned sharply, and marched off like a wind-up soldier. Just as I was wondering why he was acting that way, Ernst picked up his utensils and spoke. Anyway, congratulations. Convincing Reginald to talk has earned you yet another commendation. Honestly, I'm amazed by your talent lately. At your age, I struggled just to handle my own tasks. I wanted to point out that the commendation had nothing to do with my intentions, but saying something like that to the Chief of Operations would have been asking for trouble. You flatter me, sir. So instead, I responded with modesty and picked up my fork and knife. While cutting into the steak I'd been served, Ernst suddenly seemed to remember something. Oh, that's right, about your adjutant. They should be assigned to General Staff Headquarters today. Maybe they've already arrived. Adjutant? I blinked in confusion. My adjutant, sir. Yes, didn't I mention it before? Now that you've been officially promoted to Operations Staff Officer, you're entitled to an adjutant. I heard the higher-ups pulled some strings to assign you someone elite to match your rank. Seeing my dumbfounded expression, Ernst smiled. I heard you've been working late due to the increased workload. It's natural for a staff officer to be busy during wartime, but with an adjutant, you'll have less to worry about. I suppose you're right. This will be your first direct subordinate, correct? Make sure to guide them well. Understood. I replied calmly to Ernst's words. I tried my best not to show it, but inside, I felt like I was floating on cloud 9. Finally, I'm getting my own adjutant. No, let me correct myself. It's not exactly finally. considering my rapid double promotion had sped up the process significantly. But those minor details didn't matter. The important thing was that I now had an adjutant, and an elite one at that, hand-picked by the higher-ups. I won't have to drown in paperwork anymore. Since my promotion from acting staff officer to full-fledged operations staff officer, one thing had become painfully clear: there was way too much work. As the lowest-level staff officer, my job primarily involved reviewing documents and forwarding them to superiors. But during wartime, the sheer volume of reports and requests was overwhelming. Important matters went directly to my superiors, but the rest, including bizarre and absurd requests, flooded my desk. One such request was from a regimental commander who wanted beer supplied via aircraft so his troops could enjoy it cold. I wasn't sure whether to approve it, but I ended up forwarding it instead of rejecting it outright. Strangely enough, it got final approval, and I later saw planes delivering barrels of beer. With countless requests piling up every day, I barely had any free time. Yesterday's early departure was a rare stroke of luck. If this continued, I'd end up escaping life itself due to overwork before I even had the chance to escape the Empire. Naturally, hearing Ernst say that my adjutant had arrived filled me with relief. While lost in thought about my new adjutant, Ernst finished his meal and wiped his mouth with a napkin. "Oh, by the way, spend this afternoon in your personal office instead of the operations room. Are you sure that's all right, sir?" "Yes, you need some time to get acquainted with your new adjutant. It wouldn't be appropriate to have personal conversations in the operations room, would it?" Ernst was absolutely right. I responded with a faint smile to show my agreement. "Thank you for your consideration, Chief of Operations." While the operations room wasn't exactly a battlefield, I'd still have to rely on my adjutant in times of crisis, or at least dump tasks on them. So building rapport with my adjutant was one of the most important missions at hand. After finishing my meal with Ernst, I didn't head straight to my office. Instead, I wandered around outside headquarters for a bit. I wanted to buy a gift for my new subordinate. After some deliberation, I decided against flowers and bought a few pieces of bread from a nearby bakery instead. Compared to flowers, which were pretty but impractical, bread seemed like a better choice since it could fill their stomach. With the bag of bread in hand, I returned to my office at headquarters and took a deep breath. I'm a little nervous. The adjutant waiting inside my office was probably just as nervous. After all, only 5 months ago, I had been in their shoes, waiting nervously for my superior while drenched in cold sweat. I still remembered it vividly. When I first joined, I didn't receive a gift. Instead, Karl Heinrich, that bastard, greeted me with a string of curses the moment I reported for duty. Thinking back on the humiliation and trauma of that moment, I resolved to treat my adjutant as well as possible. I also planned to start them off with simple tasks to help them adjust to the job. "All right." With the mindset of a caring senior officer, I smiled and opened the office door. "Sorry to keep you waiting. I stopped by the bakery near headquarters to pick up some bread for us to share as a snack." I was speaking in a friendly tone, but when I laid eyes on my adjutant, I froze. The adjutant turned toward me slightly, revealing a loose, shoulder-length bob. Her silver-white hair, flowing like sunlight over a snowy field, looked elegant and refined. In stark contrast to her hair, her eyes were a deep crimson, like pools of blood. Her sharp gaze didn't feel hostile, but her expressionless face made her look naturally intense. She was an incredibly sophisticated and graceful woman. If I hadn't known who she was, that's what I would have thought. Lucy Emilia. She was one of the main characters in the game Empire of Emperor, a mass murderer known as the Empire's Nightmare. So why in the world was Lucy sitting in my office, dressed impeccably in an Imperial Army uniform. Then, locking eyes with her, I slowly shut the door. Wait a minute. Why is Lucy here? At this point in the timeline, she should still be making a name for herself on the front lines. And why is someone affiliated with the Allied nations serving as my adjutant? A spy. Both the Allied nations and the Empire were heavily involved in espionage, so it wasn't entirely impossible that she had infiltrated headquarters as a spy. But why me? Of all the possible posts, why was she assigned as my adjutant? Feeling dumbfounded, I furrowed my brows and shook my head. I must be hallucinating from all the overtime lately. There was no way Lucy could be here. No way. With renewed confidence, I opened the office door again. Captain, and immediately closed it. It was definitely Lucy. She looked exactly like her illustration in the game. Why is this happening to me? This was going to be anything but easy. Chapter 18. Why was I stuck sharing an office with a spy from the enemy nation? I wanted nothing more than to report this woman to the chief of operations as a spy, but without evidence, I'd just come off as a lunatic. For now, I had no choice but to act naturally. I took a deep breath to steady my nerves, then reopened the office door. When Lucy looked at me strangely, I shrugged. Did you hear that? The hinge on this door is making a weird noise. I'll have to call maintenance soon. The whole thing, the repeated opening and closing of the door, was just me inspecting the hinges. At least, that's what I told myself as I walked over to my desk and pulled out my chair. So, what's your name? Placing the bag of bread on the desk and settling into my seat, I watched as Lucy saluted crisply. Second Lieutenant Lucy Emilia, newly assigned as adjutant to the operations staff officer. It's an honor to serve under such a busy and distinguished officer. I'm fully prepared to fulfill my duties to the best of my ability. It was a flawless introduction. And she used her real name. Well, considering only a handful of people in the Allied nations even knew Lucy's real name, she probably didn't see the need for a cover identity. Regardless of her reasoning, the woman standing before me, stunningly elegant and poised, was an enemy spy. Not that I cared much about spies in the Empire. I didn't have any particular loyalty to this place, after all. The real problem was that the person standing before me, who was destined to become the Empire's nightmare, was now my adjutant. I wasn't the kind of person who could handle the stress of having a ticking time bomb at my side. I need to get rid of her. I had to convince the higher-ups that Lucy Emilia was unfit to be my adjutant, no matter what it took. But first I need a pretext. Tapping my desk with a serious expression, an idea suddenly popped into my head. Wait, didn't I see an anti-war protest forming outside headquarters earlier? If I played this right, I could use it as an excuse to get Lucy reassigned. Smiling slightly to myself, I acknowledged Lucy's salute. She immediately shifted to parade rest, and I addressed her in a stern voice. All right, Second Lieutenant Lucy Emilia, did you just say you're ready to perform your duties faithfully? Yes, sir. Bold response. In that case, let's test whether you're truly fit for this position. I'm assigning you a mission. Go outside and disperse the protesters. Lucy hesitated briefly before answering. The protesters, sir. Yes, specifically, the unlawful assembly in front of headquarters that failed to file for a permit with the Imperial Court. At first, we ignored them because their numbers were small, but lately, their activity has been getting out of hand. I understand, but isn't that the jurisdiction of the military police? Protests in front of headquarters are our concern as well. According to wartime security law, Imperial officers have the authority to suppress unrest within their jurisdiction. Lucy nodded, as if the explanation made sense. There's no issue with your reasoning, sir. I'll carry out the order. Good. Complete the mission and report back when you're done. Understood. May I make one request before I leave? What request? Lucy raised her hand and pointed at me with her index finger. The bread. What, was this some kind of veiled threat? Tensing up, I watched her blink once before clarifying. When you entered, you mentioned sharing the bread as a snack. If you permit it, I'd like to take one with me. Oh, that bread. Sure, go ahead and take one. I slid the bag of bread across the desk, and Lucy stepped forward to grab a croissant. She gave me a brief nod before turning and leaving the office. As soon as the door closed, I let out a quiet sigh and leaned back in my chair. Relief washed over me, and I felt my body relax. For now, I'd taken the first step toward building a case against her. Sending her out alone to handle an angry mob was practically a suicide mission. There was no way she could subdue them by herself. All I had to do was wait comfortably here until she failed the mission, then use that failure as grounds to have her reassigned. Of course, it wouldn't be solved in one go, but laying the groundwork was important. Feeling a bit more at ease, I pulled some documents out of my drawer and began reviewing them. I couldn't just sit around doing nothing until Lucy came back. I was halfway through a few reports when, bang! The sharp crack of a gunshot rang out from outside. I flinched, my shoulders tensing instinctively. A terrorist attack. No, if it were a terrorist attack, there wouldn't be just one shot. Besides, the sound was close. It seemed to have come from right in front of headquarters. Bang! Another gunshot shattered my thoughts. No way. Had Lucy fired? The idea hit me like a bolt of lightning, and I shot to my feet. I couldn't afford to stay in my office right now. You arrested all 5 ringleaders of the protest. Well done. Sergeant Bendelin, an interrogator from the military police, stared blankly at the woman in front of him. Swallowing nervously, he replayed the events from just a few minutes earlier. The woman, who introduced herself as Captain Daniel Steiner's adjutant, had briefly surveyed the riot police standoff with the protesters before drawing a revolver and firing 2 shots into the air. The sudden gunfire sent the protesters into a panic. After quickly requesting the riot police's cooperation, the woman single-handedly subdued the 5 ringleaders with astonishing ease. In truth, the riot police barely did anything aside from assisting with the arrests. This left not only the riot police, but also Sergeant Bendelin too stunned to speak. What's going on here? Startled by the voice, Bendelin turned to see Daniel Steiner approaching. Wearing his officer's cap pulled low and his coat billowing, Daniel carried an air of authority that sent shivers down Bendelin's spine. Determined not to make a poor impression, Bendelin barked out a command. Stand at attention. The 30 riot police officers in the vicinity snapped to attention immediately. After scanning the group, Daniel fixed Lucy with an icy stare. Explain. At the direct order, Lucy saluted sharply and reported. Following your orders, I dispersed the violent protesters and fired warning shots in the process. As a result, I successfully broke up the illegal assembly and apprehended the 5 ringleaders. Hearing this, Bendelin nodded as if things suddenly made sense. So it was Captain Daniel's order, of course. That explains it. A newly commissioned second lieutenant couldn't possibly have acted so decisively on their own. Meanwhile, Daniel felt like his insides were burning. When did I tell her to fire warning shots? He wanted to protest, but technically, Lucy hadn't violated wartime security laws. Instead of scolding her, Daniel extended his hand. Lucy understood immediately and handed him her revolver. Opening the cylinder, Daniel confirmed that 2 rounds had indeed been fired. Unable to suppress a bitter laugh, he glanced back at Lucy, only to hear her speak again. "Captain, these individuals violated both civil assembly laws and wartime security laws. They broke 3 different statutes, including attacking soldiers dispatched for public security without just cause. If you give the order, I'll execute them on the spot." For a moment, Daniel wondered if he'd misheard her. Didn't these protesters share Lucy's anti-war sentiments? She's talking about killing her own people. Why? No, on second thought it made sense. If Lucy wanted to avoid suspicion, siding firmly with the imperial military was the best way to do it. What a heartless woman. Doesn't she feel the slightest sympathy for them? Daniel wanted to lecture her about morality, but there were too many eyes on them. Not only were Bendelin and the riot police watching, but curious citizens had gathered to spectate, and journalists with cameras stood just a short distance away. He had no choice but to maintain the image of a proper imperial officer. "No." Click. Daniel closed the revolver cylinder and handed it back to Lucy. "These people aren't even worth killing, Sergeant Bendelin." Snapping to attention, Bendelin replied nervously. "Yes, Captain Daniel Steiner, sir." "Interrogate them and find out the reason behind their protest. Make sure you uncover whatever seditious ideas drove them to defy the imperial court and incite the citizens." "At once, sir." Visibly tense, Bendelin began issuing orders to his men, who swiftly moved to restrain and escort the ringleaders. Watching the scene unfold, Daniel squeezed his eyes shut. His plan to build a case against Lucy had failed spectacularly. The next morning, I woke up to my alarm and headed to the kitchen to make coffee, as usual. I poured boiling water over the coffee grounds and filled my mug before walking to the door to pick up the newspaper. Returning to the kitchen, I sat down at the table and took a sip of coffee. The rich, refined flavor brought me a moment of peace. Morning coffee really is the best. Satisfied, I opened the newspaper, only to freeze in place. Staring back at me was a black and white photo of myself on the front page. It showed me kneeling in front of the 5 detained protesters, revolver in hand, inspecting the cylinder. To anyone looking at it, I would have appeared to be deciding whether or not to execute them. Cold sweat trickled down my back as I read the headline. "Captain Daniel Steiner arrests illegal protest ringleaders." The headline was bad enough, but the article itself was even worse. Following interrogations conducted by the military police, it was revealed that 3 of the 5 ringleaders were paid by the Allied nations. With this discovery, suspicions about the Allied nations' involvement in organizing anti-war protests have turned into certainty. Sergeant Bendelin specifically credited Captain Daniel Steiner for his invaluable assistance. I folded the paper and picked up my mug. After taking a deep breath to calm myself, I sipped my coffee again. For some reason, it didn't taste as good anymore. This was a disaster. Chapter 19. At the same time, in the Kingdom of Eldresia. Central Intelligence Bureau, Director's Office. Is it true that the ringleaders of the anti-war protest were captured? Standing in front of a massive world map hanging on the wall, Colonel Octavian Leopold, the director of the Central Intelligence Bureau, couldn't hide his irritation. Crispin, the head of strategic analysis, and Phineas, the head of operations execution, swallowed nervously as they stood before him. After gauging the director's mood, Crispin finally mustered the courage to speak. "Unfortunately, it's true. They failed to withstand the Imperial Military Police's interrogation and spilled everything." Phineas added, "The Empire is now capitalizing on the situation, branding all anti-war advocates as puppets of the Allied nations and launching a public relations offensive." It meant that the Intelligence Bureau's plan to spark a civilian, uprising through the protests had collapsed. Of course, the uprising would have been crushed eventually, but its primary purpose was to sow public distrust in the war and the military. Once negative sentiment started to spread, the imperial court wouldn't be able to ignore it. If that slowed down the empire's offensives, Eldresia could buy time to rearm their defeated forces. But with the ringleaders captured, it had all gone up in smoke. Octavian let out a long sigh and glared at his subordinates. Who was it who thwarted our plan? This man. Crispin handed over a folder he'd been holding in his left hand. Octavian opened the folder and frowned at the photograph stapled to the top of the report. Him again. Dark hair, dark eyes. His gaunt features and wolf-like gaze gave the impression of a predator ready to strike. Captain Daniel Steiner, Imperial Operations Staff Officer. He was already infamous among Eldresia's leadership for foiling the ambush in the Tebeta mountain foothills and killing Colonel Jeremy, the retreating Allied Corps commander, in a single moment. A marked man, Daniel Steiner was listed among high-priority targets for elimination. A wildcard within the Imperial Army. He keeps interfering every single time. Octavian clenched his teeth. He wanted nothing more than to put a bullet between Daniel's eyes, but there was no way to reach him, at least not yet. Grinding his teeth, Octavian turned to Crispin. What do our allies have to say about this? Well, they're condemning us for conducting unauthorized intelligence operations that only strengthen the Empire's unity. Condemning us, did I hear that right? Are those lunatics out of their minds? They had eagerly invited Eldresia into the Allied nations when they needed help, and now they were turning their backs the moment it became inconvenient. Unbelievable. The kingdom has done its part. The Allied nations never expected us to win against the Imperial Army anyway. Our role was to tie down Imperial forces in the north. Octavian threw the folder onto his desk in frustration. They're the ones who failed to do their job. What have they accomplished on the Eastern Front? They're wasting time, caught in a cycle of victories and losses. Crispin and Phineas remained silent, their heads bowed under Octavian's furious gaze. After glaring at them for a moment, Octavian took a deep breath and raised his hand. No, it wasn't their fault. Wiping his face, he spoke with a grim expression. Damn it, there's only one option left: unleash the hounds on the Imperial Court. Phineas paled and raised his head. But sir, if we execute that operation, the agents we've planted in the Empire will be massacred. It's only a matter of time anyway. None of them want to end up like frogs boiled alive. At the very least, we need to break the Empire's fangs before it's too late. A heavy silence fell over the room. Understanding the director's intent, Phineas straightened up and nodded resolutely. Yes, sir. I'll inform the agents that the decisive moment has arrived. The following morning. Was there ever a day when I dreaded going to work this much? Thinking about Lucy's emotionless request to execute the protesters still sent shivers down my spine. But skipping work wasn't an option, so I dragged myself to headquarters. Before heading to the operations room, I stopped by my office to get organized, only to find Lucy already there. She was eating a croissant, but the moment she saw me, she stood and saluted crisply. Good morning, Captain Daniel Steiner. I gave her a half-hearted nod. You're here early, and is that a croissant? Yes, sir. The one you bought yesterday was delicious, so I bought a few more. I also picked up some extras for you, sir. Feel free to have one if you're hungry. No, I'm fine. I walked to my desk, sat down, and placed my briefcase on top. But Lucy remained standing and stared at me expectantly. Feeling uneasy, I asked, What is it? I'm waiting for you to issue orders, sir. You'll receive those in the operations room. Chief of Operation said you could work from your personal office today. What, why? Before I could process the information, Lucy elaborated. He said, Captain Daniel earned another commendation yesterday, and since there's nothing else to reward him with, at least let him have a relaxing day at work. Chief, please. Being stuck alone in an office with this woman is the furthest thing from relaxing. Suppressing the urge to scream, I nodded stiffly. Fine, let's get started then. I pulled out a stack of documents from my briefcase and handed them to Lucy. These need to be reviewed. You can start with these. Understood. Lucy took the documents without hesitation, returned to her seat, and began reading through them. Calmly blinking her crimson eyes, she reviewed the papers like a model adjutant. If I didn't know she was a spy, I might have showered her with praise. If she were just a regular spy, I might have tried to win her over by praising her work. But this woman is Lucy Amelia. For reasons I couldn't fathom, Lucy absolutely despised traitors. If I let slip my plans to defect and try to befriend her, I'd probably end up dead. Honestly, she seemed completely unsuited for espionage, so why was she here? I didn't know, but my plan hadn't changed. Getting Lucy removed from my office was still my only path to safety. The fastest way is, I needed to prove to the higher-ups that Lucy was incompetent and unfit for her position. Luckily, she was currently reviewing documents. I remembered how overwhelmed I'd been when I first started, just trying to make sense of the military jargon. Lucy was bound to make the same mistakes. I'll make sure she experiences firsthand just how terrifying a superior officer can be. Go ahead and look forward to it, Lucy Amelia. I'll nitpick your work so much that you'll want to quit voluntarily. With that devilish thought, I flashed a smirk and picked up a book to pass the time while Lucy reviewed the documents. 4 hours later, Lucy approached my desk and placed the stack of files down. I've finished reviewing them, Captain Daniel Steiner. What, already? It was enough paperwork to take at least 8 hours. She'd finished far too quickly. As expected, you're just another rookie. There was no way she hadn't missed something. I took the files and flipped through them, preparing to point out errors, only to find myself stunned. Lucy's review was flawless. She hadn't just verified the accuracy of the data, she'd checked feasibility, resource allocation, risk management, and legal and ethical compliance. She'd even evaluated whether the requests aligned with the higher-ups' intentions. To top it off, she'd calculated the projected outcomes of each operation, included numerical assessments, and created summary tables for easy comprehension. Frankly, it was perfect. So perfect that I couldn't find a single flaw to criticize. Even after going through the other files, it was the same. Unable to find fault, I gave a reluctant nod. Impressive. Thank you, sir, in that case. Not so fast, there's one more. I opened a drawer and pulled out another stack of files. These are classified Level 2 documents. Read through them and report back to me. Sir, but it's already. I won't accept any objections. Finish them before I return. Without waiting for a response, I left Lucy alone in the office. I headed straight for the operations room. There, I planned to monitor Lucy, using the CCTV feed installed in my office. The documents I'd given her contained highly sensitive information, troop deployment plans and unit movements. If she was a spy, she wouldn't be able to resist tampering with them. Once I caught her, I'd report her to Ernst and finally get rid of her. This time, the plan has to work. Confident, I entered the operations room. Oh, Captain Daniel Steiner. Sir, I saw the newspaper. Another major accomplishment yesterday, I hear. I acknowledged the soldiers and junior officers with a few nods before knocking on Ernst's door. Captain Daniel, come in." When I entered, Ernst was packing up for the day, which caught me off guard. After exchanging salutes, I asked, "Sir, are you heading home?" "Yes, it's a light day, and I have an appointment with a royal court official." Terrible timing, but I couldn't let this opportunity slip away, so I spoke with determination. "Apologies for interrupting, sir, but could you watch the CCTV feed from my office with me?" "For what reason?" "You'll understand when you see it, sir. I know you're eager to meet with the official, but I'd appreciate just a moment of your time." Ernst looked even more confused, but eventually sighed. "You do realize home is more peaceful when my wife isn't there, right?" Seeing my blank expression, Ernst laughed. "Don't tell my wife I said that. Anyway, fine. If it's that important, let's take a look." He pointed to the monitors displaying feeds from various offices, a security measure to guard against spies. New recruits wouldn't even know the cameras existed since they were hidden. "I don't know what you're hopping to show me, but I'll humor you." I nodded and stepped up to the monitors with Ernst. We focused on the feed showing my office, where Lucy was diligently reviewing the documents. 20 minutes passed without any suspicious activity. Just as I began to think it might be a wasted effort, Lucy put down her pen and stared at my desk. Is she about to steal more classified files? I'd seen her check the drawers earlier, so it seemed plausible. But instead of moving, Lucy simply parted her lips. Unable to make out what she said, I turned to Ernst. "Sir, could we rewind and zoom in on that moment?" "Of course." Ernst replayed the footage, zooming in to clarify her words. "Should I kill him?" Seeing her mouth those words made my skin crawl. I instinctively covered my mouth to stop myself from shouting. Meanwhile, Ernst chuckled. "This is your fault, Daniel. You gave her so much work that she's venting her frustration. Honestly, that workload would overwhelm any rookie." Not knowing Lucy was a spy, Ernst took it as an innocent complaint rather than a death threat. But I knew better. Sweating profusely, I forced a nod. "I'll make sure to be more considerate next time. For the sake of my survival, I just have to handle the work myself from now on." Ernst, on the other hand, seemed to come to a completely different conclusion. He wanted to show me how hardworking his subordinate is. Who knew Daniel could be so human? Pleased by what he saw as a touching display of pride, Ernst gave a satisfied nod. With such dedication to his team, Daniel Steiner is bound to become an excellent leader. Unaware of my internal panic, Ernst smiled warmly. Chapter 20. I heard an indirect death threat through the CCTV, so I returned to my office and ordered Lucy to stop working. Afterward, I took her out for lunch and showed her the facilities available to officers at the General Staff Headquarters before heading back to the office. I handled most of the afternoon tasks myself. The reason was simple. If I dumped more work on Lucy, I might actually end up dead. Of course, that was unlikely, but what if Lucy, pushed to the edge by overwork, suddenly drew the revolver at her hip and fired? That would be a disaster. So from now on, I decided to proceed with tasks in a way that wouldn't provoke Lucy as much as possible. "Captain." Just as I finished all the afternoon tasks, Lucy organized the documents and looked at me. "It's time to leave work." Was it already that late? I looked up at the wall clock, and sure enough, the hour hand pointed to 6 p.m. As much as I wanted to hum a tune and walk out of the General Staff Headquarters, leaving work with Lucy was out of the question. Who knew what might happen? "You go on ahead. I need to stay behind and review some." "In that case, I'll stay and assist you, Captain." "Or maybe not. Leaving sounds like a better idea. Let's go." I cleared my throat and stood up, draping my officer's coat over my arm and grabbing my document bag. Lucy also finished preparing to leave and stood up. As I stepped out into the hallway after opening the office door, Lucy naturally fell into step beside me. Carrying her own document bag, Lucy tilted her head curiously as she glanced at me. "Captain, you don't look well. Is something wrong?" "It's because of you, you crazy woman." That thought almost escaped my lips, but I swallowed it with superhuman patience. "It's nothing. My stomach just feels a little off. Don't worry about it." I kept my mouth shut after that and walked out of the General Staff headquarters. We made it to the eaves when I slowed my pace. It was raining. Not a downpour, but a light drizzle. Thanks to that, Lucy, who had stepped closer to me, spoke with slight concern. "It's raining. The weather service said it would be clear all day." Pathetic. Even the weather services of the distant future sometimes got forecasts wrong. Relying on today's predictions without bringing an umbrella was just foolish. An imperial officer must always be prepared for adverse weather conditions. I pulled a collapsible umbrella from my document bag. After hesitating for a moment, I handed it to Lucy. "Take this. I wouldn't want my direct subordinate to look like an idiot getting drenched on her way home." "Pardon, but..." "Don't make me say it twice." Maintaining a professional relationship, while showing just enough kindness, was the key to survival. Lucy looked at me with surprise, then raised her hands and accepted the umbrella. "Thank you, I'll make good use of it. But are you sure this is all right? If I take this, you'll have to walk home in the rain, Captain." "There's a spare umbrella in my office. I'll go back and grab it." Of course, there was no spare. But I wasn't about to share an umbrella with a suspected spy as we walked side by side. Hence, the lie. Lucy shot me a meaningful look, but soon nodded and opened the umbrella. "Then I'll see you tomorrow." After bowing her head slightly, Lucy walked off. Watching her retreating figure, I let out a sigh of relief. I survived. Sharing an office with someone who might kill me at any moment was incredibly exhausting. That aside, now I was stuck at headquarters until the rain let up. Since I was trapped here anyway, I considered getting a head start on tomorrow's work. Just then, a steam-powered vehicle with a long hood and a sleek body rolled in from afar. It resembled a Model E Dobble, a relic from the industrial era. Even in this day and age, it was considered outdated by at least 20 years. Frankly, anyone still driving one of those had to be either old-fashioned or miserly. And as far as I knew, the owner of that car fit both descriptions. Screech. The car came to a neat stop at the building entrance. The driver, as expected, was none other than my superior, Colonel Ernst. Ernst stepped out of the car and was about to enter the General Staff headquarters when he spotted me. His face lit up with a smile. "Oh, Captain Daniel, what a coincidence. I was just looking for you." "You were looking for me?" "Yes, I mentioned I'd be meeting with some imperial officials, didn't I? Well, I received some excellent news. You're going to be thrilled when you hear it." I was already starting to feel uneasy. Sweating nervously, I asked, "What kind of excellent news?" "The imperial family is hosting a banquet to celebrate the Northern Front victory. I've been invited, of course, but guess what? You've been invited too." Wait, why would they invite me to a banquet?" I was genuinely asking, but Ernst took it as a joke and lightly tapped my side. He seemed downright giddy after receiving an invitation from the imperial family. "Don't be so modest. After all the achievements you've racked up, how could the imperial family not invite you? So don't worry about it, just come along." This was bad. I wasn't joking. I really didn't want to go. From what I remembered, the banquet celebrating the Northern Front victory would be targeted by a terrorist attack. I didn't know the exact details, only that it was mentioned in the game's timeline as a single line of text. Either way, I wanted to stay far away from such unknown dangers. But there was no way a mere captain could refuse an invitation from the imperial family. Was there any way out of this? Desperate, I looked at Ernst and said, "Sir, I'm not sure if you'll believe me, but I have an allergy to the imperial family. It gets worse when I'm near nobles or high-ranking officials, so perhaps I could skip." Ernst frowned. His expression was the kind of mild disgust someone might show when hearing a dad joke for the first time. "Captain Daniel." "Yes, sir." "Please don't spout nonsense." "Yes, sir." Judging by the grim atmosphere, there was no way I could push the matter any further. Unfortunately, that meant my attendance at the banquet was now confirmed. Meanwhile, at the Imperial Eisenkron Palace, second floor of the Royal Library. "Your Highness." Sylvia, who was seated at a desk surrounded by numerous open books and ancient manuscripts, raised her head. Standing there was Lieutenant Colonel Hartmann Edelstein, an elderly man dressed in a uniform adorned with golden wing insignias, the chief bodyguard assigned to the princess. Upon confirming the identity of the person who called her, Sylvia lowered her head and turned the page of the manuscript. "What is it?" Her tone was cold, clearly signaling that she was engrossed in deciphering the ancient text and did not wish to be disturbed. However, this time, Hartman couldn't simply let it go. "The head maid, who is in charge of overseeing attire, has asked me to speak with you. She's struggling to prepare for tomorrow's banquet because your Highness has shown no interest in dressing up and has been staying in the library." Sylvia let out a low sigh. "Then tell her that spending time studying tactics and strategies would be far more beneficial than dressing up." "Your Highness." "Hartman, I have no intention of being a spectacle for those attending the banquet. Honestly, celebrating a victory just because we managed to push back the Allied forces in the north." Trailing off, Sylvia shook her head in disapproval. "If it were up to me, I would have used the banquet's budget to strengthen national defense. I can't imagine what Father is thinking." A faint smile appeared on Hartman's lips. It was a remarkably humble statement, one hardly expected from someone born to lead. However, her distaste for social gatherings could lead to disadvantages in the long run. "Your Highness, banquets are the foundation of diplomacy, and diplomacy is politics. A nation, at its core, is a collection of groups. Excessive diplomacy may alienate the common people, but a complete lack of it may turn the nobility into enemies. Historically, those admired by only one side never lasted long. To rule over both factions and keep them beneath your feet, that is what it means to be emperor, the sole leader who commands the world's most powerful military. Do you understand what I'm saying?" While his words weren't wrong, Sylvia still wasn't convinced. Seeing her silent defiance, Hartman suddenly spoke as if something had just come to mind. "Ah, come to think of it, Captain Daniel Steiner will also be attending the banquet. Isn't he someone your Highness is acquainted with?" At the mention of Daniel Steiner, Sylvia's shoulders flinched. "If my death allows you to live, that's enough for me. After all, a soldier exists to protect the people of their nation." She still couldn't forget those words he had said to her. He was someone it wouldn't hurt to keep close. If possible, she wanted to have him on her side. Letting out a small cough, Sylvia closed the manuscript. "Very well, summon the head maid. I suppose a bit of embellishment won't hurt." Though she spoke in a nonchalant tone, Hartman noticed the faint blush creeping up Sylvia's ears. "It seems your Highness isn't particularly skilled at hiding your emotions." Was Daniel Steiner such an impressive figure in her eyes? With an amused smile, Hartman gave a small nod.